The Roy Lopez, all the grandmasters, Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru, Kasparov, all of them play this opening because it's very aggressive and positional at the same time. Today, I'm going to be showing you all the moves, the strategies, the tactics, the middle game plans, everything. Just watch the full video and then go play some games and watch your ratings go through the roof. Kicking things off in the 500 region. Today, I'm going to be teaching you guys about the Roy Lopez. It's also called the Spanish game, and it basically starts when we put the bishop on b5, applying pressure to the knight. Putting the bishop on c4 would be the Italian game. Now, all the world champions and the grandmasters that you know, they usually play the Roy Lopez. It's very positional, but it could also get very aggressive. For example, once they play a move like bishop to c5, we're able to play pawn to c3. And the whole idea is still to play pawn to d4 and apply pressure to the bishop. Pawn to f6 was played, but we all know what's about to happen. You guys should not be playing pawn to f6. It exposes this diagonal pointing towards the king. Now I'm just going to play pawn to d4, and I'm still applying a lot of pressure to this bishop. But now my plan is to find some ways to get either my queen on this diagonal to get to the king, or I could also get my queen and my bishop on this diagonal to get to the king. Playing f6 is also bad because it takes away the traditional square from the g knight. Now the knight may have to go to e7. So the pawn takes. Let's take back, hit the bishop. Now we're forcing the bishop to move. The best square for the bishop is b4. Let's block the check with the knight. And then the opponent decides to play pawn to d6. Surprisingly, pawn to d5 doesn't necessarily win the knight, even though the knight is pinned. Because if I play d5, there's pawn a6. And if I pull my bishop back, there is pawn b5. With that being said, I'm just going to get my king out the center of the board. And one thing that you guys are going to be learning throughout the video when it comes to the Roy Lopez is we're going to try to castle as quickly as we possibly can. And then once we get our king castled, we're going to try to keep the opponent's king in the center as long as possible. For example, now that the opponent plays knight e7, Black is just trying to castle the king. To prevent the king from castling, I'm going to put the bishop on c4. Now the king has nowhere to go. And that's because of this f6 move. Now that the king is in the center of the board, my whole idea is to open the center of the board. Then the opponent just played a very interesting move, knight to a5, which is attacking my bishop. They're basically trying to move away my bishop so that way they could castle their king. But here's what I'm going to do. The knight no longer guards the bishop. So what I'm going to do, especially since the knight move and the king is kind of exposed, I'm going to play the move queen to a4 check. Queen a4 check hits the king, hits the unprotected bishop. Pawn to c6 protects the knight, didn't protect the bishop though, so let's just grab the bishop. And just like that, we're ahead by a piece. The good thing is, even if Black decides to take my bishop and I take back with the queen, it still keeps the king in the center of the board. Queen to c7 was played, and because we successfully managed to win a piece, castle our king, and keep his king in the center, now it's time to try to open the center. But before I do that, let's just play bishop to f4. Now we have two pieces attacking his weak d6 pawn. He only has one piece guarding the pawn, which is why he plays pawn to d5. And I'm considering taking on c5, but because his king is in the center and I have good attack on his king, I may not do it. I think it's the best move though. Let's just do it. It's the best move. Let's just take, and he has to take with the queen, and my bishop on c4 is gonna be under attack. So what I may do is I may check his king on b5 first. But let's see what he does. Queen takes e5 is what I'm expecting here. So queen c5 was played. So as I said before, let's start by checking on b5. We're ahead by a piece, so I have no issues trading the queens off the board. But because the guy's king is in the center of the board and I'm attacking the king, that's kind of why I didn't really want to trade the queen. So knight c6 was played here, and the pawn on d6 is actually hanging. The thing is, if I take his queen, he takes with the pawn and I don't win the pawn. What I could do is just immediately take the pawn on d6. The knight is not able to take my queen due to the pin, and if the queen takes my queen, my bishop takes the queen. If the queen takes my bishop, my queen is also there to take their bishop. So the queen takes the queen. Let's just take. He's not able to take my bishop due to the pin, and I'm attacking this knight because this knight on c6 is pinned, so it's not doing anything. I mean, he's also not able to get castled. Bishop to d7 was played though, so that broke the pin. I'm ahead by 4 points in this position, so trading should be fine. But let's not trade. Let's just move the bishop to d6. I'm trying to get my rooks in the game. Pawn to e5 would be a perfectly playable move, by the way, because it opens up the e file, and then my rook would get access to the e file. The king decided to castle. I like the idea of playing knight to d5 to threaten some checkmating ideas. Another move I really like is pawn to b4. Pawn to b4 traps the knight on a5. And this is why knight does not belong on the edge of the board. Because now the knight is not able to go here. If he goes here, I take. If he goes here, I simply take with my bishop. So the knight decided to take on b5, but my bishop was just guarding the square. So let's just take the free knight. Now I'm ahead by 6 points. The goal is to start trading. He's helping me to trade. Let's just take here. The knight on a5 is also under attack. I'm expecting knight back to c6. Now I play rook c1, putting my rook on the same line as his knight, which means his a7 pawn is now unprotected. Because remember, we spoke about the fact that pin pieces does not protect. But a6 was played, and there's actually a very nice idea here. I'm trying to see if it works. I'm thinking of check, and then once the king moves, I4. But there's knight takes b4. So I'm not going to go with that idea. So let's go with this idea. Let's go knight a7 check. And then once the king moves, I just get rid of the knights. And because I'm trading the pieces off the board, it should just be completely winning for me. King moved. And before I take the knight, I'm actually going to play the move bishop to a5 check. Very, very nice move. And again, as we said, pin pieces does not protect. The knight is not able to take the bishop. And once he moves the pawn to b6, that's a drawback behind that pawn move. If you notice, the pawn was guarding c6. It's no longer guarding c6, which means I'm able to take on c6 with the rook because my knight on a7 also attack the c6 square. The king moves out the way, and the king is attacking my knight. If I take with the rook, I lose my knight, which means I'm going to take with the bishop, guarding my knight, attacking his rook. My knight is also guarding my rook. And now I need to get my f rook and my knight in the game. Rook to d7 was played. Let's get the rook in the game, putting the rook on the same line as the opponent's king. Now I'm just trying to get some discovered attacking ideas, but this should lead to some checkmates. There has to be some form of checkmates here. The king went back, my knight is under attack, but let me just bring this knight in the game. If he wants to take on a7 and said, okay, I'm getting 2 pieces for the rook, because I'm ahead by 10 points, I actually don't mind giving him 1 point just to trade some pieces off the board. So rook to b8 was played, which is very interesting because now if he takes and I takes, he's going to take my rook for free. So to combat this, I'm thinking of just putting my knight on c8, which is a nice move because now my knight is no longer under attack and I'm guarding. Oh my lord. Oh, I forgot about rook takes d4. It's the same idea. My bishop is just pinned. And if I take his rook, I'm going to lose my rook. Luckily, I'm ahead by 7 points. So let's just play h4. Now his rook is under attack, but I'm still not able to take as I'm going to lose my rook. But I should still be able to deliver some checkmates here, like rook b3, rook a3, rook takes a6. For 500, though, this player is playing really good. But then king to b7 was played. It defeats the whole purpose of everything. Because not only am I able to take and then check the king and then he's just going to be... This is just checkmate, basically. I mean, the opponent was playing, so this is mating 2, by the way. Like once I play rook to c7 check, the king has to go to a8, and that's going to be a checkmate. So let's give a check. The king has to go here, and that's just a checkmate. But more RUY LOPEZ against 600 rated players. Stick around. Opponent is now 600, and this is another RUY LOPEZ game. And as we said, we're putting the bishop on b5 this video, applying some pressure to the knight. We're trying to play like the grandmasters and the world champions. What persons are going to be playing this bishop c5 move? Here we just need to play pawn c3 followed by pawn d4, hit the bishop, chase around the bishop, and we should already have a nice position. Now, when they go knight f6, we still go pawn to d4, but there's actually something slightly different that I like to do if they take on d4. If they take on d4, I like to play e5, not taking back the pawn, but just start chasing all their pieces around the board from the jump. Now he's forced to move the knight. Now, once the knight move, now we take on d4 and we're attacking the bishop. So as we said, we're just forcing all the pieces to move. Bishop to b4 is a good move here because it kind of regains the tempo. But my opponent does not know how to count. Whoa. Because I had two pieces guarding. He has two pieces attacking. That's just a free knight. And my queen is also attacking this knight. So bishop takes was played. Let's just take the bishop though, seeing that bishops are better than knights. I'm attacking this unprotected knight, so he has to be careful. He saw it. He saw it. He guarded the knight. But let me just get my king out the center of the board here. And he also got his king out the center of the board. And then I'm actually going to play pawn to h3, just chasing this knight out of my half of the board. Remember, we spoke about the fact that we don't like to have the opponent's pieces in our half of the board? That's the purpose of pawn h3. Just getting the knight out of my half. And the only square where he could put the knight is h6, which is on the edge of the board. And knight does not belong on the edge of the board. He still decided to put the knight back to h6, but now I'm able to just use my bishop, take on h6, completely exposing the opponent's king. Well, that's if he decides to take back the bishop. But either way, I'm just going to develop my knight, move my pieces towards his king until I'm able to deliver a checkmate. So he took, let's go knight c3. The idea is now to play knight e4, followed by knight to f6. If I'm able to do this, then it should lead to mate. On to d6. That's a good move. But let's just continue with our plan. Let's go knight e4. The plan is to play knight to f6. On to c5. Tax my queen. So I have to move my queen out the way before I play knight to f6. And I also had to ensure that I keep my e5 pawn guarded, because once he takes, I need to be able to take back the pawn. The rook went to e8, but okay, it's now over. There's just so many ways to win this. The simplest way is just to first take the rook on e8. It's also a free rook, by the way, because if the queen takes on e8, knight to f6 is a fork, the opponent resigns. But more RUY LOPEZ against 700 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 700. We're still playing some more RUY LOPEZ. So we develop the knight, hit the pawn. That's what we spoke about. And then once the knight guards it, we go bishop to b5, applying more pressure to the knight. And knight e7 is being played. I think this is called the Cosio variation. But whenever this happens, I think we... How does this go again? Okay, let's stay principled. Let's first get the king out the center of the board. If I was playing with the black pieces, I would play something like g6 and try to castle. He plays knight to d4, and he's basically moving the same pieces more than once in the opening, which was definitely not necessary. Let's just pull the bishop back though. No need to take the knight. The knight was attacking my bishop. But if he decides to take my knight, then my queen takes, and I'm the one who is threatening a checkmate. Plus, he plays f6. You should not be playing f6. His king is also not going to be able to get castled now that he plays f6. And the fact that my king is out the center and his king is in the center, now it's time to start playing moves like d4. And now I'm just going to burst open the center of the board. He plays d6. He didn't take the pawn. He's trying to keep the center very close, which makes some sense. Let's take the pawn, just trying to open some lines. If he takes with the f pawn, then the queen could go to f7. He decides to take with the e pawn. It's funny because white is actually completely winning here. His queen is basically trapped, and because the queen is on this file, I'm able to play the move rook to d1 and attack the queen. The only way for him to not lose the queen is to put one of his pieces in the way. If he puts the knight in the way, I'm just going to take the knight. If he puts the bishop in the way, then I should be able to play bishop to e6. And I'm basically going to be sacrificing a rook and a bishop in order to gain a queen. Let's hit him with rook to d1. So the bishop went to d7, and as I said, bishop to e6, sacrificing my bishop. I'm not going to be getting like a whole lot of material from this. Like, if you're able to do some math, you notice that my rook is 5 points, my bishop is 3 points. I'm going to be losing 8 points in order to get his queen. So in the end, I'm going to be having like 1 extra point, but the fact that I have a queen should be good enough. So it's bishop takes, rook takes, rook takes, and then I just finish my development at that point. Okay, that's interesting. He played knight to d5. So he preferred to lose an entire 3 points instead of just giving me 1 point. So that's very interesting. Now I just need to take the knight. I mean, I could take with the rook, but there's bishop to e6 at that point. I could also just take with the pawn. I could take with the pawn, but let me just choose to take with the bishop to maintain this diagonal. And if he moves his bishop, I would have won his queen. He decided to play queen to e7 instead, but now his pawn on b7 is unprotected. So now all I need to do is take the unprotected pawn, attacking the rook. The rook moves out the way. I'm assuming he's going to attack my bishop, and I'm just going to pull it back. If he doesn't attack my bishop, then I'll finally complete the development of my queenside pieces. He did attack my bishop. Let's pull it back. On to g6. Okay, now it's very evident that he's trying to get his king castled. It's going to be very hard for him to castle with my bishop on d5. So let's just develop like normal here. And then he plays a5. Maybe he wants to play bishop to a6. He's leaving his g pawn unprotected. I mean, I could just develop my bishop, but instead I'm going to pull my bishop back to b3 because if I had developed my bishop, the rook would have took my pawn on b2. So now that I pulled my bishop back to b3, I'm able to develop my bishop, but I'm also threatening to play the move knight to d5. And if I'm able to play knight to d5, oh, that was why he played h5. But luckily it does not work. Oh, it does work. All right, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm still gonna play queen to g3. My idea was if he takes, I take, and then it's gonna be a mate. But it's not gonna be a mate because my rook is no longer gonna be on d1. So he took the rook, and before I do anything, let's take on g6 with check. I'm now trying to find some checkmating ideas. The king now has to go to d8. I'm thinking of playing knight d5. I'm also thinking of playing bishop g5, which is a very strong move. Yes, bishop to g. Look on this move, bishop g5. Once I play bishop g5, yes, I'm sacrificing the bishop, but I'm also attacking this bishop with my rook. So it's a discovered attack. If he decides to save this bishop, I'm able to play bishop takes f6 and pin his queen. If he decides to take my bishop, I would have take, but he plays queen to d8, which doesn't really change a lot that is happening. Now, how am I going to do this? First of all, I could check. The king moves. I check here. The king runs. Let's just take. Let's take on f6 with check. Let's hit the king, hit the rook. He blocks the check with the bishop. Now I take on d1 with check. Now the king has to move over, and he's gonna either get checkmated or lose his queen. What I'm seeing now, keep in mind, we have to ensure that we're looking on the forcing moves. And taking this bishop is a free bishop, but I'm trying to mate. So queen to a6 is the move I'm seeing here. If queen to a6, the king can't move, the rook has to block. And then once the rook block, that's when I'm thinking to apply more pressure to the pinned rook. There's also bishop e6, but then the king is just going to run. With that being said, let's give a check on e6. As I said before, king can't move, rook has to block. Then we play bishop d5, applying pressure to the pinned rook. If he takes on g5, we take the rook, and that should lead to a checkmate. I mean, this will lead to a checkmate. Pawn to c6 was played instead, which should not change too much because I could still take attacking the queen. Rook is still under attack. Okay, he sacrificed his queen, which means he's not going to get checkmated. Never mind, he took the rook. That was bad, which means that's just a checkmate. But more RUY LOPEZ against 800 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 800. We're still going to be playing some RUY LOPEZ. So I attack the pawn, he guards the pawn, and this is the RUY LOPEZ. Now he plays knight to f6 to attack my pawn. I'm just going to get my king out the center of the board, not worrying about the pawn, because if he takes the pawn, my rook gets the e file, and my rook will be on the same line as his king. And then he decided to play bishop to d6. That is not a principled move, by the way, because it's blocking out his d6 pawn. Usually when your opponent break principles or they play weird move, I always recommend people to just burst open the center of the board with d4. And also if their king is in the center of the board, you also want to burst open the center of the board. Knight takes d4 was played, and surprising to say, that's actually a blunder, and my opponent is about to lose a piece. And that's because of the whole king being in the center of the board. So this is something that you guys have to keep in mind when it comes to these types of openings. Now, what I'm going to do is I want you guys to notice how the bishop and the knight is sitting adjacent to each other, which means once my pawn gets to e5, that's going to be a fork. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take on d4. Now I'm basically ahead by a piece, which means he has to take my knight. Once he takes my knight, because his king is in the center of the board, I'm still able to go ahead and fork him, even though the bishop covers the square. Because my whole idea is once the bishop takes, I hit him with rook to e1. Now his bishop is pinned to the king. So the best for him to do is just to castle his king, allow me to take the bishop, and then just play some chess from there. But Black is completely lost. He could also try queen to e7, but we know what to do when a piece is pinned. We're just gonna PP on the PP, and that's also gonna be losing. But instead of just castling his king and losing the bishop, he decided to give me the knight for free, and his bishop is still gonna be lost because it's pinned. So let's just take the free knight. There's nothing guarding the knight, and that also means his g7 pawn is unprotected. So he decided to, okay, this is actually not bad. Because now if I take the bishop, pawn to d6 hits the queen and the rook. Okay, that's actually interesting. I'm still going to take it though, but once he plays pawn to d6, I'm going to be forced to play something like rook to f5, which is still good for me because it's going to be meaning that I get a lot of pieces for the rook. If I simply move the rook, I'm just going to lose. If I simply move my queen, I'm going to lose the rook. So let's go rook to f5. And then once he takes, I takes, and I'm going to be ahead by a lot of material here. Okay, pawn to g6. That's a very interesting move. He's basically saying, I'm not going to take the rook so that way you take back my bishop. I'm going to play g6 so that way I take the rook for free. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play bishop back to d3 so that way if he takes my rook, I take his bishop and then he's not going to be able to take my rook due to the pin on his king. If he moves the king to h8, then that would be a very interesting move. Okay, he didn't do that. He decided to play rook to e8, which is also not bad because he's threatening checkmate on e1, which I am forced to defend, and there's no fancy ways to defend against it. I mean, I could also just play h4, but then he's going to take my bishop. So let's go bishop to d2, preventing him from checkmating on e1. He finally took. Let's just take back. He's not able to take my bishop, by the way, so that's good. And I'm still ahead by 2 points in this position. Rook to e5 attacks my bishop, but I just need to pull the bishop back. There's nothing really here. Basically, what's happening is I have three minor pieces, which is 9 points, versus the opponent's rook, which is 5 points. It's very important that I complete my development though. Like, because my a rook and my knight on b1 is not in the game, it makes it seems as if he's more developed than me. But once I get my knight out and then get my rook in the game, then everything is going to be fine. So he plays queen to e7, which means that's a battery on e1, so I have to be careful. But once I play the move knight to a3, which is putting the knight on the edge of the board, I'm going to be fine. Now he's decided to triple up on the file, which will not work. So let's just move the knight off the edge of the board. Remember what we said about putting the knight on the edge of the board. Knights on the rim is dim. You do not put knights on the edge of the board. So if you have to develop your knight and you have to put your knight on the edge of the board, put it on the edge of the board and then move it off the edge of the board. Oh, he plays rook to g5. He's attacking my queen. The his queen guards the rook. But what he missed was my bishop. My bishop is also covering the square. Or maybe he thinks once I take his rook with I don't know what he's thinking. Because maybe he thinks if I takes the rook, he's able to checkmate me. But that's never gonna be a checkmate. Because once I takes and his rook takes, my bishop is able to block. So he basically just gave me a free rook. And one thing that I've noticed, and this is something that I've been telling my students a lot, is all you need to do to increase your rating is to follow the principles and try not to blunder while doing it. You don't have to do fancy stuff. Just, okay, like in the opening, let's just grab the queen. There's nothing to learn here. He's just completely losing. So in the opening, you're like, okay, I'm going to develop my pieces, not blunder. In the middle game, I'm going to improve the position of my pieces, not blunder. In the end game, I'm going to attack weak pawns, push past pawns, activate my king, not blunder. A lot of persons blunder because they also don't think about blundering as well. Okay, he resigns. But more Roy Lopez against 900 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 900. Let's go e4. He's ripping the Caribbean. He's from Barbados. Let's go knight f3, hit the pawn, knight c6. Good old Roy Lopez. It's also called the Spanish game. And remember, once they play a6, just pull the bishop back to a4. In the future, the bishop will be heading to b3, targeting the f7 pawn. And Another thing to keep in mind is whenever they attack your e4 pawn, you don't necessarily have to defend it. It's best to just castle your king, because if they try to take the pawn, this rook to e1 move, putting your rook on the same line as the opponent's king, is going to be very dangerous for black. So he did decide to take on e4. It's also theoretical, so it's not like he's immediately going to lose. But we're going to now play the move rook to e1, putting our rook on the same line as the knight. And basically, we're going to be winning back our pawn without any pressure. Now, knight to c5 is an interesting move, because he's probably saying if I take his knight, he's going to take my bishop for free. But it's not a free bishop, because then I'm going to take his knight and he lose the queen. So what I'm seeing here is I take his knight, he takes my knight, I take with the rook with check, he blocks with the bishop, and then my bishop is going to be under attack. So I may have to play knight c3 to guard it or just pull it back. I'm also thinking of d4, but he's going to take. So I think I should just take here, actually. Like, just take here. And then once he takes, yeah, let's just take here, because my bishop is going to be on a4 under attack. He may also just, he's still going to take my bishop. So let's just take. And the fact that his king is in the center of the board, I'm now just going to try everything in my power to keep his king in the center. It's not going to be very, very easy, though. But once I recapture my pawn, I'm going to ensure that I finish my development as quickly as I can. So he decided to take with the d pawn, which is the correct approach. If I play rook takes bishop back d4, knight to d7, and I could try rook to h4 to start some attack. There's also knight takes, bishop e7, pawn e4. I think knight takes is the more mature move. Let's play knight takes. He still needs to play bishop to e7, but because his knight is on c5, I'm going to be able to play d4, gaining a tempo on the knight, and I just need to focus on developing my knight, developing my bishop, and then I should be fine. But one thing about the RUY Lopez is this idea: your rook being on the same line as the opponent's king. For example, if he plays like a weird move, then I have some nice discovered attacks. Bishop e6 is interesting. Maybe he's trying to castle on the queen side, but I think he needed to try to move his bishop and castle as soon as possible. Now, if d4, there's knight d7. If I takes, there's queen takes. I like the idea of queen to f3. Queen to f3 is just a nice little move, because it actually threatens to take on f7. If I take on f7 now, king takes and he's fine. Queen f3, there's bishop e7. And now if I play d4, there's queen takes. With that being said, let's start by playing pawn to d4 and attack the knight. I'm expecting the knight to go back to d7 100%. So the knight went back to d7. I'm thinking of queen to f3 here. If he takes, I go pawn takes and start to move my pieces towards his king. Otherwise, I'm threatening to take on f7. I could also play knight to c3, but he's going to take through the queens and I don't have any advantages. So let's start by playing queen to f3. So we're already targeting his f7 pawn. And again, because my rook is on the same line as his king, there's a lot of tactical stuff that could happen. So he took on e5. Let's take with the pawn. So that way we have some control over the f6 square and the g5 square with my bishop. What I want to do is play knight c3, followed by knight e4, then bishop g5, and start my attack that way. I mean, black is playing very well, though. I'm not going to lie. Like, this is a nice position to have with the black pieces. He also has the bishop here. Now, bishop to c5, it's good. You know, he's developing his bishop. But because my plan is to play knight c3, with the idea of knight e4, that will attack his bishop. I'm also thinking of queen to g3 here, because if queen g3, I attack the pawn, castling doesn't work due to bishop h6, and I threaten mate, and if pawn g6, he loses the rook. That's actually a more aggressive way to play. Let's go queen g6. And it's also me trying to keep his king in the center. I'm basically saying, you're not able to castle because of bishop h6. Now, if he plays queen to d7, that's going to be very strong, because he's basically saying, if you take on g7, I castle my king, and then I'm going to play rook to g8, attack your queen. My rook is going to be on the same line as your king. I'm going to be down by a pawn or two, but I'm going to be attacking you with the bishop here, which means if he plays queen d7, I'm not going to take the pawn. I'm just going to go knight c3, knight e4, maybe develop my bishop to g5. Pawn to g6, pawn to g6. I mean, it definitely keeps his king in the center. He's also weakening the dark squares around his king, which means if I'm able to get rid of the dark squared bishops off the board, then my knight is going to be better than his bishop because his dark squares are weak. With that being said, let's hit him with bishop to g5, hitting the queen. And once he moves the queen, I play knight c3, knight e4. If he pulls the bishop back, I just trade knight c3, rook d1, and I'm good. So he plays queen to d4, which is an aggressive square for the queen because he has this battery pointing towards f2. He's also attacking my b2 pawn. Now, luckily, I'm able to just develop my knight, guard b2, and I'm doing fine. The good thing is he's now not able to castle on the queen side. If he castles on the king side, he has a lot of dark square weaknesses around his king. And once I play rook a to d1, every single piece is going to be doing something in the game. So bishop to b4 was played. He's applying some pressure to my knight. Off the top of my head, I like the idea of just playing rook to e4, hit the queen, queen c5, bishop to e3, trying to chase away the queen from guarding, but then there's queen back. Knight e4, if he takes, I check. If king here, I check, but then there's king here. So let's just play the regular rook to d1. Every piece is now doing something. He's also forced to move his queen out the way. And if he moves his queen to c5, that's actually going to be an inaccurate move due to knight e4 hit the queen. And I'm thinking about sacrificing the exchange, but I may not do it. So queen to b6 was played. Now what do we do here? Queen to d3 threatens checkmate. Queen to d3, if he castles, there's bishop f6, and his dark squares are massively weak. There's knight to e4. If he takes my rook, I check. If king here, I check. If king here, I'm not sure. So let's start by playing queen to d3. Queen to d3 is basically forcing his king to castle on the king side. And then once his king castle on the king side, I'm going to use the fact that his dark squared bishop is not close to his king and the fact that his dark squares around his king is weak to start an attack. And I'm basically going to be setting up a lowly checkmate where you have a bishop on f6, a queen on h6, and there's nothing you could do to prevent the checkmate on g7. So he castled the king, as we spoke about. Let's go bishop to f6. The good thing about my position is my dark squared bishop is so strong. He's also just not able to put a rook on the d file ever. Once I get my queen to the h6 square, it's game over. The question is, how is he going to be preventing this? Bishop to f5. Good try, but I mean, he's attacking my queen. The plan was to move the queen. Let's just move the queen out the way. That's where I'm headed. How is he gonna? I think it's over. It's actually game over. Because how is he gonna prevent a queen from going to h6? If he, oh, it's not game over. He could move the rook, and if queen h6, there's bishop f8. So it's not game over. It's not game over. So I'm gonna have to try to set up one of those queen sacrifices. But he didn't find rook bishop to e8 followed by bishop f8, which means no, it's actually game over. He attacks my rook. No need to guard the rook if we're able to drop the queen on h6. No, he's basically getting checkmated. This is called a lowly checkmate, by the way. Like, there's just nothing you could do to not get mate. And the computer in this position would actually be suggesting queen takes f2 to be the best move. He did sack on f2. Let's just take. And then bishop to c5, also one of the moves. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my king until he's not able to check me anymore. So bishop to f2 is also the best move here. But once I take on f2, king takes f2, I should be able to pre-move queen g7. He check. Let's take. No pre-moving queen to g7 is good. He grabs the rook, and that's just a checkmate. More RUY LOPEZ against 1,000 rated player. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,000. More RUY LOPEZ. Let's hit the pawn. He guards the pawn. Now we attack the piece that protects the pawn. Now, knight f6 counterattacks the pawn, but in the nature of the RUY LOPEZ, you don't necessarily have to protect the pawn immediately if his king is in the center of the board. So here it's fine to just get your king out the center of the board. We have a lot of ideas of keeping the opponent's king in the center. Knight takes e4 is one of the main ways to do it. Now we could choose to play rook to e1 or pawn to d4. You know, it's the same idea. But let me start by playing rook to e1, hitting the knight. And this is basically how you're going to be regaining the knight. So knight to d6, I think, is the main move. And then after knight d6, there's two ways in which I could do this. I could choose to take the knight, then just take back my pawn, or I could choose to just take on e5. But he decided to play f5. How many times am I going to be telling you guys to stop moving your f pawn if the king is still in the center of the board? You know, I'm going to mate this guy. I'm going to checkmate this guy. Let's see. Let's say I hit him with pawn d3, right? Knight d6, I grab this. Or, because I don't want to trade this knight. No, wait. Pawn d3, knight f6. Okay, it's not as easy as I thought. Now I want to get rid of the knight, take on e5, so that way I'm threatening d3 ideas and queen h5 ideas. Yeah, let's do that. Let's take on c6. The knight is the main defender of the e5 pawn. So we regain our pawn like this. His knight is still on the same line as his king. So he has to be worrying about ideas where I attack his knight, and then if he moves the knight, I have discovered attacking ideas. Queen to d4, that's a nice move. Queen to d4 is a very nice move, by the way, because he's threatening f7 and he's hitting my knight at the same time. Well, this is actually a very complex position. Like queen h5, there's pawn g6, and if I takes, I'm mated. What I'm going to do though, I'm actually going to ignore the fact that my pawn is under attack and just play pawn to d3 because I'm attacking his knight, right? If he takes on f2, my king moves out the way and I'm still attacking his knight. And if he tries to move his knight, my rook is on the same line as his king. So a lot of stuff could happen when someone's king is still in the center of the board. He could choose to take my knight. If he chooses to take my knight, then I just take his knight. Okay, he decided to take on f2. Let's move the king over to h1. Knight to g3 check does not work, luckily because I take, he has no more checks. Moving the knight should be an immediate loss because my knight is on. Okay, he didn't move the knight. Okay, he also did not blunder the knight because my knight is under attack. And if I check pawn g6 takes, again, I'm mated. What if I play bishop to e3? If I play bishop to e3 to attack his queen, he has queen moves to h4. And then if I try to play knight to f3 to attack his queen, he has knight to g6 check. But then I move my king to g1. His queen is still under attack. And if he moves the queen, I take the knight. If bishop e3, queen h4, knight f3. If he moves the queen, then I take the knight and I'm ahead by a piece. Am I winning a piece here? Bishop to e3. Let's start with bishop to e3 because it attacks the queen, and once his checks does not work, it means his moves aren't as forcing. The queen is not trapped because h4 is the only square. Like what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take his knight, but I don't want to take his knight, then he takes my knight. So once he moves the queen, I want to move my knight out the way and attack his queen. Oh, yeah, queen takes e3. It's a good. Is it a good move or a good try? I did not see that. If I take the queen, he's gonna fork and I lose the game. I just can't take the queen. Let's just take the knight. Let's take the knight. His queen is still under attack. My rook is still on the same line as his king. He's currently ahead by a pawn though. But once the queen move, I could take on f5. The thing is, I don't want him to get castled though. That's the thing. Like, if he manages to just get his king castled, then he's just gonna have two bishops versus my two knights, which is kind of crazy. So let's see what he plays here. Queen to f4. Queen to f4. I see the vision. I see the vision. What he's trying to say is if I move my knight, then queen to h2 is going to be a checkmate, and he's also attacking my knight. Now I could try to take on f5, but he should be able to take my knight. Okay, let's say I check. If I check, he moves, and then I take on g6. That's not a checkmate because my queen guards it. And then if he takes, I take with check, and then I worry about it. So let's go with that. It's very important that you play your forcing moves. Queen to h5, it's a check, it's a forcing move, and it's on his half of the board. And remember the very important idea that you guys have to keep in mind, especially when it comes to like Italian and RUY Lopez Spanish game. Castle your king first, keep the guy's king in the center of the board. That's the whole entire game plan. King to e7 was played. I was kind of expecting this. Now, the thing about this move is queen to f7 check may not work due to king d8. And where's my next check coming from? That's the thing. If I take it, the rook, he takes my knight. So what I'm thinking of is looking for another check. For example, knight g6 check is interesting. If I play knight g6 check, he has to take. And then I take his rook and I'm still preventing the mate. No, there's also an in-between move here. Knight g6, pawn takes g6. There's e takes f5, check. And then once he moves his king to, let's say, f6, then I take the rook. Now, after that happens, my queen is on the same line as his rook, so he's going to move his bishop. And if I take his rook, I'm mated. But once that happens, I should be able to just pull my queen back and I'm preventing the mate. So let's go with that. Let's hit him with knight g6. Like this little battery that he has here is very dangerous. Once he takes, I'm going to take on f5 first with check. So that way it unleashes my rook into the attack. So he took, my queen is under attack, his rook is hanging, but let's play an in-between move first. Yo, If I take the pawn, there's bishop e6 blocking the check, and now I can't take the rook. And if I take this with check, he moves and I lost the game. Dang, I didn't even see that, so I have to take. I just have to take the rook. This guy's 1,000, by the way. Why is he playing so strong? So if he takes for the pawn, I mean, I really want to develop my knight. I'm not gonna lie. I'm probably just gonna develop my knight so that way my rooks are connected. But taking on g7 is a free pawn. It comes with check. But okay, bishop e6 I was expecting. Keep in mind, I cannot touch the guy's rook because he's trying to do a removing the guard tactic and win my queen. However, taking on g7 is a check. It's a forcing move. He decides to block with his bishop. He's still threatening a checkmate, but it doesn't matter because now I'm able to take on f5 with check because it's a forcing move. So once we're playing forcing moves, once we're playing moves on the opponent's half of the board, even though there's a checkmate in one here, I just need to not forget about it and I should be doing fine. So I'm expecting king to d8 because if king to d8, I'm still not able to take the bishop due to the mate. Uh, King to d7 does not work, bro, because now I take the bishop with check. It's a forcing move. So you're still not able to checkmate me. Now you have to block with the bishop or move the king. And this is going to be leading to a checkmate. So, yeah, I mean, he played very well, but my moves were just way more forcing than him. So he blocks with the bishop. And this is now just checkmate in two moves. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take on e7 with the queen with check. The king has to go to c8 and then queen to e8 is going to be a checkmate. So let's take with check. He moves the king and that's just a checkmate. More RUY LOPEZ against 1100 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1100 and blessing you guys with some more RUY LOPEZ. So we apply some pressure to the knight immediately off the jump, and a6 or knight to f6 is the usual move that you guys are going to be seeing. Sometimes they play pawn d6, but it blocks in their bishop. Immediate pawn to d5 is an interesting move. It's definitely an interesting move, but he's basically playing d5, allowing me to take, and he's okay with bringing his queen out early. So that has to be a mistake. Now, once his queen takes, yes, he's attacking my bishop, and he has the pawn in the center of the board, but it allows me to develop my knight and gain a tempo on his queen. And now that he pulls his queen back to d8, the good thing about the RUY LOPEZ is the fact that we started off by playing the move bishop to b5. So now that we played bishop b5, the knight is pinned, which means it's not really guarding this pawn on e5. But that being said, I'm able to take on e5, and I'm ahead by a pawn. I gained a tempo on the queen. Once I get my king out the center, you guys know the drill. The rook attacks on the e file. The opponent's king stays in the center of the board. Now that bishop to d7 is played, he's getting rid of the pin. But because we know that bishops are better than knights, I'm going to take his bishop, getting rid of the bishop. Once he takes with the queen is going to be on the same line as my bishop. The king is also on the same line as my bishop. So let me go ahead and get my king out the center of the board. The good thing is he was able to castle his king on the queen side, which means his king is safe. So he's only down by a pawn. I need to finish my development though, so I'm going to play the move. Pawn to d4 is interesting. If queen takes... Let's just go pawn to d3. Let's not lose any pawn. This pin should be annoying. And if he plays pawn to a6, I'll pull my bishop back to a4, maintaining the pin on his knight. Otherwise, my plan from here is to move my bishop, move my queen, swing my rooks in the game. So knight to f6, I'm thinking about pinning. But let's play bishop to e3. And bishop e3 is an interesting move because it actually attacks his a7 pawn. Because the knight on c6 is pinned. And keep in mind, pinned pieces does not protect. So if he's not careful, I will be able to take the pawn. And the knight is not going to be able to take back due to this pin. Queen to e6 was played, which means the knight is no longer pinned. And if I take the knight, then take the pawn, he's going to play pawn to b6 and trap my bishop. So I need to just focus on my development here. I'm thinking of playing queen to f3, knight e5 could be an annoying move though. With that being said, let's just play the move rook to e1. I'm putting my rook on the open file and I'm putting my rook on the same file as his queen. With that being said, now I'm threatening some discovered attack on the queen. And just a tip for you guys, if someone's rook is on the same line as your queen, just don't leave your queen there, because once the piece, the only piece that is in the way, moves out the way, your queen is going to be under attack. Same thing if a bishop is on the same line as your queen, and it's the same thing with the king. If pieces are on the same line as your king, you have to be careful. Okay, so he did decide to move his queen off the same line as my rook. And I'm still thinking of queen f3. Like, I'm just trying to connect my rooks, to be honest. Okay, let's go ahead and play queen to f3. I'm trying to also play bishop to f4 and attack his queen. Knight e5, slightly afraid, but I should be able to play queen to g3 or queen to h3 and check his king. And, rook to d1 I may play, but the rook is not doing anything, seeing that it's pointing towards the pawn. Knight d4 is an interesting move that I forgot to consider because now he's forking both my queen and my bishop. And if I takes, there's queen takes. I do not gain anything from that. So what I'm going to do to save myself is I'm going to start by checking his king. So I get my queen out of the attack by checking his king. And then once he moves his queen, then I'm going to get my bishop out of the attack, which means I didn't lose my queen or my bishop in the process. He moves the king. Now I pull the bishop back to c2, well, to a4, guarding c2. And all my pieces are doing fine from here. My rook on a1 is not really doing much, but I'm going to work on bringing that piece in the game. Queen to g6. Not sure why he would play queen to b6 because he's volunteering to put his queen on the same diagonal as my bishop, which means this knight is pinned. And all I need to do from here is to start applying pressure to the pinned knight, basically. How am I going to do this is the question. Swinging my rook in the game no longer works. So, okay, let's just pull the bishop back to b3 and attack the unprotected pawn. The good thing is, because his knight is pinned, I don't have to worry about losing my bishop. His pawn is unprotected, which means I'm also preventing him from completing his development, and completing the development is super important to bring all his pieces in the game. Okay, so he did decide to develop the bishop without even protecting the pawn. And I think I'm about to win some material because the fact that he puts his bishop on d6 means his rook on d8 is no longer guarding the knight on d4, which means the queen is the only defender of the knight on d4. And if the queen is, whenever you're attacking something and it is only being defended by a piece, you should be thinking about removing the guard. So because the queen guards the knight, I'm going to hit him with knight to a4, hitting the queen. And then once the queen moves out the way, then I take the knight on d4 and I'll be ahead by a piece. So he moves the queen. Let's grab the free knight. And one thing he could do to at least win a pawn is to take on h2. The same discovered attacking idea. My bishop is unprotected. The bishop is on the same line as the rook. So once the bishop takes on h2 and then my queen takes, he could take. But he's choosing to trade pieces off the board, which is not advised. If you're down in material, you don't want to be trading. But there's two pieces attacking my rook actually, because the queen is also applying some pressure to my rook. We know that knight does not belong on the edge of the board, so I'm thinking of just pulling the knight back to c3. I'm also thinking of bishop to c3 to attack his queen, but if bishop c3... Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Let's pull the bishop back to c3 first and attack the queen. And then once the queen move, I may just take the knight, then pull my knight back in the game. And keep in mind, bishops are better than knights, yes. But if you're ahead by an entire piece, then your goal should just be trading off all the pieces off the board. Plus, the fact that the knight is the only defender of his h7 pawn. So if I get rid of the knight and the pawn takes, his h7 pawn will also be hanging. Queen to g5, he moves the queen out the way. And what we planned was to get rid of the knight because we're ahead in material. We're trying to trade. We're also removing the defender of h7. Once the queen takes, I pull my knight back in the game. And it's just a regular position where I'm completely winning because I'm ahead by a piece. Oh, he took with the pawn. That's interesting because now the rook could get the open file. But this pawn becomes hanging and the rook doesn't get the open file. And then once I take the pawn, if his rook takes, then I'm going to take back with the rook, and everything is doing fine. Plus, I'm now ahead by 5 points, which means if I could get the queens off the board, then I'm just completely winning. He decides to attack my bishop. I could either protect my bishop or simply pull my bishop back. Rook is still not able to get to this file. Pawn to f5 was played. Okay, it doesn't really do much, so let me just pull my knight back in the game. Like, remember, knight does not belong on the edge of the board. So if you have a knight that is on the edge of the board, you should be thinking about different plans that you have to bring that knight off the edge. Rook to f6, he's going for a rook lift. That's very interesting. He wants to play rook to h6, hit the queen, and then once my queen move, he take on h2. Now, To defend against this, I'm going to play the move rook to e6, which protects the h6 square. So if the rook goes to h6, then he's blundering the rook. And if he trades the rooks off the board, then that's what I want. Because the more he trades, the easier it is going to be for me to win the game. Rook to f8 was played. He's basically doubling up his rooks. He's saying if I take, he's still going to take back with the rook and swing over. But I'm not going to take because to take is a mistake. Instead, I'm going to swing my rook over to e1, doubling up my rooks on the e file. And he now has to be careful because his back rank is weak. Notice how he did not move any of the pawns to create any loft for his king. It's called loft. Yeah, like when you move one of the pawns so that way your king is able to move, it's called a loft. He decided to trade. Yo, I almost took with the rook. That would be bad because it would have left my c1 square unprotected and then I would have gotten checkmated, which means I have to take with the bishop. Queen to d2. Queen to d2 is an interesting move because it attacks my unprotected rook. It also attacks my unprotected pawn. I'm not really able to guard both of them at the same time. I mean, I could try rook to e2, but queen c1 loses the game. With that being said, I'm just going to play the move queen to e3 with the idea of trading the queens off the board. Because as I said, once you trade the pieces off the board, then it becomes easier for you. Now, queen takes c2 was actually a blunder. I'm completely winning in this position. I'm actually able to win the opponent's queen. If you're able to find it, kudos to you. But once I play the move bishop back to b3, not only am I attacking the opponent's queen, I also have a battery moving towards e8. So he now has to defend against the checkmate, and I'll simply take his queen. If he decides to move his queen out the way by taking my pawn, then queen to e8 would be mate, which is why he decides to sack the queen, and then I'll just take the queen. And from here, I'm just completely winning. Bishop to c5, that's just another free bishop. I'm also attacking his rook on f8. So he has to move that rook. And then once he moves the rook, which he didn't, which means that's just checkmate. More Roy Lopez against 1200 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1200, some Spanish game I'm going to be playing. So we hit the pawn, apply pressure to the knight, which is the main piece that is guarding the pawn. And once we see a6, we pull the bishop back to a4, just maintaining the pressure on the knight. Like, we're not trying to take the knight and win any pawn. Knight f6 hits the pawn. We get working out the center of the board. We're not afraid of them taking the pawn. And now my opponent plays bishop to c5. Now, the moment you see a bishop goes to c5, you should immediately be thinking about pawn to c3 because now our idea is to play d4. Now, he is able to castle his king, but then if he castles his king, which is what he did, I'm able to play d4, and I basically have just the best control over the center of the board. He took the pawn, I take back the pawn, I have two very strong pawns in the center. His bishop also has to move, and then from here, it's just going to be the most regular, natural development. So he pulls the bishop back to b6. Before we start developing, though, I noticed that I have the option of playing pawn to d5. Now, if anytime you have a good center and you're able to like move the pawns forward to attack the opponent's knight, it's something that you definitely want to consider. Because what it does, it forces the opponents to break the principles of chess. Like if you think about it, they do not want to be moving the same pieces more than once in the opening stage of the game. So if you're able to do something that forces them to move the same pieces more than once in the opening stage of the game, then that's how you're going to be getting an advantage. Okay, that's definitely not the score for the knight. Like, if you're going to move a knight forward, ask yourself, how am I going to go back? Like, you don't go into a farce if you don't know what's the way out of the farce. Because where is he going to put the knight once I play pawn to a3? His knight is now just trapped. There's nowhere for the knight to go. The best he could do is try to take a free pawn. But if he takes a free pawn, I'm taking a free knight. So we're like 10 moves in and I'm already ahead by a piece. So he did take the pawn. Let's take the knight. We're not afraid of him taking on f2, by the way, because he has two attackers. We have two defenders. A knight and a bishop is 6 points. My rook and the pawn is also 6 points. But the knight and the bishop is better than the rook. Whoa. Mr. 1200 played queen to h4, applying more pressure to f2, not seeing that my knight is on f3, which is able to just take out the free queen. That's crazy. Mr. Wacky Wheels. Okay, surprisingly, he did not resign. He chose to take on f2, so let's just take. And then if the bishop takes, I'm just going to play king takes, and this is just completely crushing. Pawn to d6. Okay, let me just go ahead and checkmate his king. Let me put my bishop on the same line as his h7 pawn, and then I'm going to start creating some checkmating threats to force him to push the pawns on the side that his king is on, and then I'm going to be delivering the checkmate. So bishop to d7, let's go queen to d3. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he does not see the mate, but I'm assuming he's going to play pawn to g6 or either pawn to f5. So pawn to g6 was played, which means the dark squares around this king is now weak. Let's go bishop to h6, controlling the dark squares, and then I'm attacking the rook. And now once the rook moves out the way, then my plan from there is to play moves like queen to d4. Once I hit him with queen to d4, it's over for him on the dark squares. Now it's funny because pawn to f6 is something, rook to e5 is also something, but now once I pull the knight back to f3, this is like removing the guard. The rook is basically pinned to a checkmate. So he has to just play something, and then I'm just going to take his rook. Once well, he resigns. More Roy Lopez against 1,300 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,300. E4, E5, we go knight to F3. And after knight c6, that's when we play the Roy Lopez. Now, as I've been saying, a6, knight f6, these are the moves that you're going to be seeing. Sometimes you may see bishop c5, yeah, which is what my opponent plays. And whenever the bishop goes to c5, I like to play pawn to c3. So I also recommend this in the Italian game as well, because a bishop on c5 really attacks the f2 pawn, and we want to ensure that we play moves like d4 so that way we're able to chase away the opponent's bishop. He decided to take on d4, which should be an inaccurate move because this is not the Italian game. Taking on d4 is actually a bit worse now because if I take, he checks, I block with the knight, he takes here. But now I'm able to play e5 and immediately attack his knight. In the Italian game, I wouldn't be able to play that because he would have been able to play d5 and counterattack my bishop, which means now he just has to ensure that he moves his knight to safety. Knight e4 would be a playable move in this position. I'm trying to castle. You guys know the idea. I'm trying to castle so that way I start an attack, but it looks like he's going to get his king castled. So what I'm going to do is try to get as much control over the center as possible so that way it's easier for me to attack him on the king side. So after he plays knight e4, now I'm going to go ahead and castle the king. If I had take on d4, bishop to b4 could be a bit annoying. I mean, I could have played knight d2, but we prefer to ensure that we try to get more development than the opponent. And because we're trying to get more development than the opponent, it may cause us a pawn. Now, what I'm seeing is if he takes on c3, I might be able to play a move like queen to d5, which attacks the unprotected knight. And the unprotected knight is also the only defender of his bishop. So things could get bad for him in that position. He did take. Let's hit him with queen d5, hitting the knight, hitting the bishop. Now, he's completely losing. It's just very hard for him to play here. And keep in mind, my king is castled, so he has to ensure that he focuses on getting his king out the center of the board. Now, okay, he decided to play bishop takes f2, which appears to be a blunder. I mean, even knight. Okay, here's what I'm thinking of. If I take the bishop, he takes, I play king takes, and I'm surprisingly better out of that position. However, what if I just move the king? If I move the king, if he moves the knight, I'm able to take his bishop. That's my idea. So the question is, if I move the king, is he able to do anything with the knight that is very forcing, which will prevent me from taking the bishop? And that I'm not seeing. So let's just move the king to h1. So now if he moves the bishop, I take the knight. And if he moves the knight, I take the bishop. Taking my pawn on b2 doesn't really change much. I'm just going to take with the bishop. He's helping my development. His knight on e4 is still unprotected. And he decided to attack my bishop. So I guess he's like, okay, if you take my knight, I take your bishop. But I could actually take the knight. Because if I take the knight and he takes my bishop, I could still take his bishop. There's actually a lot of stuff that I'm seeing here. I'm planning on even taking this knight on c6 first. So that way, once he takes back my bishop, I take his knight. I'm still ahead by a piece. His bishop is still under attack. And I'm now thinking of bishop g5, hit the queen. I mean, I may have to take on c3 first. There's also bishop to c4 to threaten a checkmate, but he's just going to castle his king. Okay, I'm going to go with this idea. Let's take on c6. I'm winning a piece in this position because once I take on c6, I'm going to take on e4. So he took, now I take. So his bishop is under attack. I'm ahead by a piece, and I'm about to take this pawn on c3. So he pulls his bishop back to c5. I'm thinking of bishop g5, but he's just gonna take here. Like, I'm trying to not allow him to castle, but let's just take on c3. He's gonna have to just castle at the end of the day. But once he castles, now I'm thinking of knight g5, threatening mate on h7. He does not have a minor piece that is able to easily prevent the mate, so that could also be bad for him. Now I need to develop my bishop. Bishop to g5 is still an idea, but knight g5 I just really like because it threatens the mate. And remember what we talked about when it comes to threatening these types of checkmate? The whole idea is not to hope that they do not see the mate. It's to have them move pawns on the side that their king is on. The more pawns we get them to move on the side that their king is on, the weaker their king becomes. For example, now he has to play g6. And once he plays g6, the dark squares around this king becomes very weak. And the fact that I have a dark squared bishop on the board could be a huge issue for him. And if he plays g6, this f6 square, I could also put a knight. But the 1300 decided to play f6 instead of g6, which means that's just a checkmate. But more Roy Lopez against 1400 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1500. Let's hit the pawn. He guards it, and we're playing the Roy Lopez. Pawn to d6, it doesn't really do much. It pins his knight, it blocks out his bishop. I'm just going to use the time to get the king out the center of the board. Remember what we're trying to do. Castle our king, keep his king in the center. Immediate bishop to d7 was played, so that way he's breaking the pin. So that's not a bad move, but I'm going to immediately go ahead and play d4. Now I'm just trying to open the position as best as I can. a6 was played, which is an interesting move. I could take the knight, then take on e5. And then once he takes on e5, I take and attack his bishop with my knight. If he trades the queen, I take. His bishop is still going to be under attack. But I think I'm going to have a slight advantage. So let's get rid of the bishop with the whole idea of taking the pawn on e5. So remember, one thing about the Roy Lopez is the fact that the bishop attacks the main defender of the pawn on e5. So now that he takes, what I'm not going to do is take his rook, because if I take his queen, his rook joins the game. I want him to take my queen. Now bishop to e4 was it was a move. Not sure how accurate it is though, because now that the queens are no longer, well, it's I'm thinking of rook e1. There is pawn d5, but then I get the tempo on the bishop. Let's go rook e1. This idea will happen a lot. You put your rook on the same line as his king. He plays d5 to guard the bishop. Now we play knight c3. That's a tempo on the bishop. If he wants to take my knight and give me the bishop here, that's on him. His pawn on d5 will also be will be attacked twice. If he pulls his bishop back, then his pawn on d5 will be attacked twice. So I could say his king will be like your plan is to, in a perfect world, is your king is out the center, his king stays in the center. If his king leaves the center, then they do well, but you still have attack on their castled king. So bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. There are now two pieces attacking d5, and because my rook is on the same line as his king, I'm thinking of e6. So bishop to b4 was played, which is interesting because now if I try to take his pawn on d5, my rook is going to be captured because my knight is pinned. With that being said, I'm thinking about the move queen to g7, hitting the unprotected bishop, hitting the pawn. If he takes my knight, I take his pawn, takes my rook, I take his rook. His knight is under attack. I also like pawn to e6. Pawn to e6 takes knight to e7. Let's go with queen to g4. It seems to be more aggressive and complicated. And if you think you have good tactical skills, then you should go in the complicated positions, especially since his king is not going to be as safe. And keep in mind that tactics will happen whenever there's unprotected pieces on the board. So the g7 pawn is unprotected, and that's why he decided to pull the bishop all the way back to f8. So he's basically wasting time in this position. Now there's two things I'm thinking of: developing my bishop with tempo, or just play pawn to e6. I like the idea of just developing my bishop with tempo. I guess he's gonna go queen d7, and I hit the queen. And if he goes knight d7, I still go e6. So let's develop my bishop with tempo. So not only did he wasted time by moving his bishop more than once, literally develop the bishop and undevelop the bishop, I'm also developing my pieces with tempo. So he's now just wasting a lot of time. Like, the guy literally has none of his pieces out, and this king stays in the center of the board. This is like the dream for Roy Lopez players. So knight e7 was played. His knight is pinned. Not able to apply any pressure to the knight just yet. If I take, there's queen takes. So what I'm going to do is, okay, if e6, there's f6, but at least this diagonal is going to be open. Or I could, okay, why did I almost miss bishop takes knight? So bishop takes knight is actually the move, because it's basically I'm going to be forcing him to make a drawback mistake. Because once I take the knight, if he takes with the bishop, he loses this pawn. And if he takes with the queen, he loses this pawn. And obviously, he's not going to take with his king because his king is just going to be too weak. So generally, you don't want to be giving up your bishops for knight. But if you're going to be winning material, then knock yourself out. He decided to take with the queen. He doesn't want to lose this pawn. He chose to lose this pawn. I like the idea of playing e6 though. Because if I play e6, it's like, okay, whenever you see a good move, look for a better one. Because if he takes, I win his queen. If he decides to castle at that point, I could take, my queen checks the king, but then he blocks. Don't really gain much. But if he decides to castle, there's knight. No, there's no knight takes d5. Let's just take. Yeah, I'm trying to be too fancy. Queen c5 now attacks my knight. First instinct is to bring more pieces in the game to guard the knight. There's also a check that I have on his half of the board. If I check here and he takes, I play pawn takes. The king runs, so I want to put my rook on d1 before I go for this check. Otherwise, I'm thinking about pawn e6, and if he takes my knight, I take. Let's just go rook to d1, because this is the whole idea of what we're trying to do. We're trying to play chess with all our pieces. Like, there's no way you could show me one piece that I have that is not doing anything. And I want you guys to also notice that I made minimal pawn moves in this game. And that's like how you know that you have a perfect opening, when you could get every single piece out just by making 2 pawn moves. Now he plays rook to d8. This should be losing if I'm calculating right, because again, his king is in the center of the board. We're going to keep his king in the center of the board. And because my rook is on the same line as his king, I'm thinking about ideas along this file. And when it comes to finding the best move in chess, we look for moves that we can play on the opponent's half of the board. The moves on the opponent's half of the board that we're looking for are the checks, the captures, and the threats in that order. With that being said, I'm going to hit him with knight to f6 check. If he takes, I play pawn takes. Now both of my rooks are just too active. He's going to have to block with his bishop, and this is just a check on his king. He has to block with his bishop. I'm down by a piece, but this has to lead to checkmate. Oh, I actually thought he could have blocked with his bishop, and then if I go rook takes, queen takes, takes, he takes, and that's mate. But luckily, my piece coordination is also good. You know when you have good piece coordination when all your pieces are working together. So now I just need to take the free bishop. If he moves the king, that's a checkmate, which means he has to sack his queen. And once he sacks his queen, I'm just going to take the free. Well, it's not a free queen, but I'm just completely winning here. So he sacked the queen. We take the queen, hit the rook. If he takes my rook, I take back. And I have a queen. He has a rook. White is completely winning this game. Now I just want to get rid of all his pawns. Well, he decided to resign. More RUY LOPEZ against 1,500 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,500. Some Spanish game coming your way. Some RUY LOPEZ coming your way. So it's either a6, which he quickly played. Let's pull the bishop back, keeping some attack on the knight. He immediately decided to play b5, which you should not be afraid of, because once you pull the bishop back to b3, we're now targeting his f7 pawn, and he has to be careful about his f7 pawn. So he decided to develop his knight and apply some pressure to my e4 pawn. But does that mean I'm able to play knight g5? That's the question. Knight g5, d5, I takes. Okay, let's just castle the king. Let's just get the king out the center of the board. Usually it works if their pawn is on d6, but if the pawn is on d7, no need to do all of that. And he also plays bishop to e7, which is a good move. He's just trying to ensure that he gets his development out of the way. This is also a good way to play against the RUY LOPEZ when you have the black pieces. Now, whenever they play like this, let's just continue with our plan. Let's go rook to e1. Now I'm protecting the e4 pawn. And then from here, I just want to finish my development. Now, a very important move, not yet, is pawn c3, so the bishop goes back to c2. In fact, let's actually play pawn c3, so that way any knight a5 move that is played, my bishop is able to come back to c2. So usually this is also a position that you guys need to pay attention to, because my opponent is playing very good moves. For example, now that he plays the move pawn to d6, I'm going to play the move pawn to h3, and this is a prophylactic move. A prophylactic move is basically seeing the opponent's idea or knowing what the opponent's plan is, and then just try to prevent it. And the fact that he plays pawn to d6 is a sign that he may want to play bishop to g4, which is not always good, but I want to play d4. So if I had played d3, then bishop to g4 wouldn't have been as good, but d4 is what I want to play. He pulled his knight back to E8, which is definitely a suspicious move. I don't know why he would undevelop a piece for no reason when he has a bishop on C8 that needs development. Let's just play pawn to D4 here so that way I could get a big center. I'm also not expecting him to take. Usually when the pawn goes to D4, sometimes it's best to keep the tension, but he also has to ensure that he's on the lookout if I play pawn to D5. So he decided to play bishop to B7. If I play B5, there's knight A5. The position is closed, so there's not much. So what I'm going to do from here is just complete my development. Now, something that I want you guys to keep in mind is when the position looks like this and the opponent is like playing the right moves against the RUY LOPEZ, your bishop is usually one of your last piece to get developed. And you may want to know about this move, knight to D2 to F1 to G3. Very thematic maneuver to use when you play the RUY LOPEZ. So he moves his king over to H8, which means he may want to play the move pawn to F5 and start opening some lines, but that should not work. He just doesn't have enough active pieces. So let's just continue with our plan. Let's play knight F1. And then now that he plays pawn to F5, usually to take is a mistake, but the rule says to take is a mistake and you should only trade when it improves the position of your pieces. I am going to trade because once I take, my rook gets the open file. He may also lose his e-pawn, and I'm now able to continue with my plan, and I get it with a tempo. Now I have 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking his pawn. He has 1, 2, 3 pieces guarding the pawn, but my knight on G3 is actively threatening his rook. So he pulls the rook back to F8, and I'm now just about to win a pawn. Let's just take the pawn on e5. And then he takes. And what I'm seeing here is if I go ahead and take the pawn too quickly, he's going to first trade the queens off the board. And things could get very complicated in that scenario. So first, I'm going to trade the queen, even though it gives his rook access to the open file. Luckily, my bishop on b3 covers any little tricks that he may have. So let's just go ahead and take the free pawn. And I could confidently say white has an advantage from here. I'm just ahead by a pawn, so it's not like, okay, the position is crushing, but I won a pawn and I'm in the end game. And you guys know what happens when you're in the end game. You start trading pieces off the board to win the game. But then he decides to play bishop c5. I mean, it's good to look on the opponent's last move to see what they're trying to do, but you also need to keep in mind that the opponent's last move may not work. So even though he's applying pressure to f2, you should always ensure that you look for your possible checks. Plus, he's just going to lose more material because my bishop, the same bishop on b3, is covering the f7 square. So once I give a check on f7, I defend against the fork that he's threatening, but I'm also going to take his rook because he's going to be forced to sacrifice his rook on f7. And then my bishop is going to take his rook, and I'm also going to be attacking his knight on e8 twice. So now he has to move his knight, but I'm just ahead by 3 points here. He moves the knight to f6. Because I'm ahead by 3 points, my goal is to start trading pieces off the board. So I'm going to play the move bishop to g5, pinning the knight to the queen. And now my intention is just to get rid of the knight. Like, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind, and this is something that I've been saying to my students, like, obviously we understand that bishops are better than knights, but if you're ahead by 3 points, you shouldn't be thinking too deep about the fact that bishops are better than knights. You should just be trading pieces off the board, because if you just trade pieces off the board, if you're ahead by 3 points, then it's going to make the game so easy for you to win. He moves the rook over to f8. He's attacking my bishop. I mean, my goal is to trade, so let's just get the knight off the board. And if he takes my bishop, the plan was to trade the rooks. Now he takes the bishop. I still want to trade more pieces off the board. So now I'm going to play rook to e8. I want you guys to notice, like, my whole entire plan is in this position is just to trade as much pieces off the board. It makes the game way easier for me to win. So he took. Let's take. I'm now applying pressure to the knight. Okay, do I take the knight? Okay, before I take the knight, let's play rook to d1. Taking the knight is also a good move, by the way, because again, if you're ahead by 3 points, the least amount of pieces that is on the board, the harder it is going to be for you to blunder. So, for example, maybe I could say if I had traded the knights off the board, then maybe I wouldn't have gotten forked with the knight. But I'm not going to get forked by the knight. So my bishop is now unprotected. I need to also get my bishop back in the game. So let's go bishop to h5, bishop to e2, and then my bishop is going to be in the game. Okay, he pulled his bishop back to d6, but that's actually bad because now I'm able to fork on f5, which hits the king and the bishop. So let's hit him with knight f5 check. He's also about to lose even more material because once he moves the king and I grab the bishop, He takes my knight and my rook is able to take. Now I'm attacking his f6 pawn. Now I'm ahead by 4 points. So he moves the king. Let's just move over the rook to apply some pressure to his bishop. And now I'm just trying to chase away his knight, push my pass pawns up the board to win the game. He pulls the bishop back. Let's pull the bishop back to e2 first, so that way, I'm kind of dominating his knight, so that way his knight has no good forward moves. He pulls the knight back to attack my rook. Let's just move the rook out the way. That's also like beyond the safe square that my rook had to go. But slowly but surely, I should be able to convert this game and turn it into a win. King back to d8 was played, which means now I'm able to play bishop to g4, which hits the knight, and I'm also applying some pressure to the bishop. So that's also going to help me to do more trades. But he decided to move the knight, but my rook and my bishop is now applying pressure to his bishop. So once I take the bishop, that's just a free bishop. And now I could say I'm completely winning, which is why he resigned. But more RUY Lopez against 1,600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,600. Let's go with the RUY Lopez. Knight c6, bishop e5, applying some pressure to the knight. Pawn a6, as we spoke about, we pull the bishop back, not taking the knight. Pawn to d6 was played, which means this knight is now pinned. But before we do anything, let me just get my king out the center of the board first. We know the whole idea. My king is now castled, and the opponent is a few moves away from castling. Bishop to g4 was played. It's not a bad idea, but I should be able to play knight c3. Like, I'm just developing my pieces, basically. Now, this pin is a bit dangerous, so I may have to play h6 to chase away the bishop. For now, it's not really doing anything. So knight to f6 was played, not bad. The opponent is also developing their pieces, and I have to be a bit careful here. I don't want pawn to b5 followed by knight to d4 to be played. So let's just play h3. Let's get the bishop out of our half of the board. We spoke about the principle of neutralizing pieces on our half of the board a lot of times, and once the bishop goes back, then I'm going to play pawn d3. So I'm not able to play d4 unless I play g4. I'm probably going to consider it though, because if I play d3, he's just going to go bishop e7 and castle. And then the whole idea of trying to keep his king in the center of the board will not work. So the bishop went back to h5. Let's go ahead and play g4. And just to let you guys know, you should not be pushing pawns on the side that your king is on. This is actually very dangerous. There's also some knight takes g4, bishop takes g4 sacrificial ideas. Now, I know how to defend against these, but even if my opponent tries to do it, it's still not going to be an easy game for me. So the bishop went back to g6. He didn't went for the sacrifice. Now I'm able to play pawn to d4 with the same idea. I'm just trying to open the center of the board, seeing that way his king's in the center, but he should be able to get away with just bishop e7 and castle. I'm still not worried about the whole knight takes e4 idea, because after a few trades and I get my rook on the e file, I should have some good compensation for that pawn sacrifice. So b5 was played, okay, which means my bishop is under attack. Am I able to sacrifice? Like, let's say I takes. The knight is now pinned. What is he going to do? Bishop takes e4. Bishop takes e4, and I'm not able to play d5. So let's just pull the bishop back. Knight takes e4 was played. No. Okay, that has to be a mistake. Like, there's actually a very thematic tactical idea that will happen a lot if you play this, and it's just recognizing these two knights, especially this knight on c6 being unprotected. So because the knight on c6 is unprotected and I'm already attacking this knight on e4 once, I'm going to play the move bishop to d5, which means I'm attacking the knight on e4 twice and I'm attacking the unprotected knight on c6. If he tries to take on c3 first, saying okay, it's an in-between move, I'm going to take on c6 and I'm going to play an in-between move in between his in-between move. So we're just about to win an entire piece here. Or maybe an exchange if he decides to move his knight, but let's see. And just for a tip for you guys, don't be playing chess and just be keeping your king in the center of the board. Like, you should look to castle your king. And if you're going to be delaying your castling, you should at least ensure that the other moves that you're playing are like developing moves and improving your position. It shouldn't be you trying to win pawns with your king still stuck in the center of the board. So the queen moves to d7, protecting this knight, But now I'm able to just take the free knight on e4. I'm attacking twice, he's guarding once. Let's just take the free knight. And just like that, we're ahead by a piece. This job's not finished though. Like I'm still trying to prevent his king from castling. But again, all the guy needs to do is play bishop e7 and castle. He also gave up his bishop for a knight. So let's just take. Oh, pawn to d5. That's a good try. Because if I pull my bishop back to d3, pawn to e4 is actually a fork. But I'm not going to move my bishop back when I'm able to move it forward, especially since I'm attacking the queen. Now the queen just has to move out of the way. And I have two pieces attacking e5. He only has one piece, which is the knight guarding e5. So on the next move, I'm just going to take another free pawn. And the queen guarding the pawn actually doesn't count because once I take, if the knight takes, I takes, and the queen takes, because the queen and the king is on the same line, I should be able to play rook to e1, pinning the queen to the king. So this is now just completely losing. And the fact that I just took on e5 means my queen is now attacking this unprotected pawn. So he plays g6, attacking my bishop. And hopefully you guys know about danger levels and offense is the best defense, where he attacks my 3 points, but because I'm able to take the pawn and attack something more valuable than 3 points, I do not need to move my bishop. He also needs to be careful because he could be getting checkmated. Like, it's just keep in mind what's the idea. You don't need to be memorizing the moves. Memorize the idea. So if someone says, "How do you play the RUY Lopez?" Don't say you play e4, e5, knight f3, bishop b5. You put this here. You're just like, these are the moves, and then after the moves, these are the plans. So rook to d8 is now completely losing because once I hit him with queen to c6 check, the king is actually not able to move. He has to block with the rook. And then once he blocks with the rook, my bishop is guarding the square, but I'm not even going to take the rook because the queen is like one of the only defender of the rook. And if the queen is not there, he would be getting checkmated. I'm going to hit him with bishop to g5. This is called removing the guard. The queen guards the rook. If he takes my bishop, he's mated. If he doesn't do anything, then he loses the queen. So in this position, it's just over. So he did decide to take with the queen, and that's just a checkmate. More Roy Lopez against 1,700 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,700. More Spanish game coming. Bishop goes to b5, apply some pressure to the knight. And as we said, a6, we pull the bishop back to a4, not taking the knight. And whenever you see b5, the bishop is just going to go to b3, and we're still going to be applying a lot of pressure to his f7 pawn. So he did play b5. Let's pull the bishop back. And now that the knight goes to f6, another theme that you guys need to keep in mind is a knight on f6 attacking e4, we could just castle, not guarding the e4 pawn, because we're not afraid if they take and we go rook to e1, because it puts our rook on the same line as their king. And as you know, our goal here is to try to keep their king in the center of the board as long as possible. a6 was played. It looks like he's trying to prevent knight g5. I wasn't really intending to play that move, to be honest. No, I'm going to play d4. Seeing that my king is out the center and his king is in the center, now my goal is just to open the center of the board. Bishop to d6. That's an interesting move, but usually the bishop should not go on d6. He's actually at risk of losing an entire piece here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and take on e5 because if he takes with the knight and I take with my knight and he take with the bishop, pawn f4 wins a piece because if he, okay, it doesn't win a piece because if he pulls the bishop back, pawn e5, he's able to check. But then once I move, he has to move the knight. His rook is unprotected, and I should be able to sack my bishop, check, pick up the rook, or even play queen d5, hitch the rook, and threaten f7. So we are going to go ahead and take on e5. Now, if he takes with the bishop, then at least I could say I have the bishop and he has the knight. Otherwise, there are some crazy stuff that's about to happen. So he did decide to take with the bishop. So he saw what's about to happen. But now once I take with my knight and he take with his knight, my goal is to start chasing around the knight, keep his king in the center of the board. And I'm sure white is better here. So to ensure that he doesn't castle, I can't legally prevent him from castling, but I should be able to play the move pawn to f4. Pawn to f4 hits the knight, which means he is forced to move the knight. Anytime you're able to force the opponent to break any principles, like moving the same pieces more than once in the opening, it's always going to be benefiting us. So the knight went back to g6. We're going to continue with the plan. Let's play e5, forcing him to break even more principles. And then now once the knight goes back to h7, I could confidently say the game is over here. And there's a very nice tactic in the position, and it is based on the fact that this f7 pawn is weak and his king is in the center of the board, plus the fact that he has an unprotected rook. The move that I'm going to hit him with is queen to d5. Not only am I threatening the unprotected rook, I'm also threatening a checkmate, which means he has to save the mate by castling the king or playing queen e7. But once I take the rook, I'm just completely winning. So he decided to castle. Let's grab the free rook. Now we're ahead by 5 points. Pawn c5 was played. He's trying to trap my bishop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play c4 so that way his pawn doesn't go to c4. The downside of playing c4 though is the fact that my bishop is not really active on this diagonal anymore. So I may have to pull my bishop back, assuming that he just doesn't take the pawn, because we all know that to take is a mistake. So queen c7 was played. Not too bad. My queen is now on the same line as his rook, so I have to have some level of carefulness happening. So let me just pull my queen back to d5 so that way I'm safe, and then I'm assuming he's going to play bishop to b7, but now I just need to play queen to d6. I'm ahead by 5 points. So once I'm able to trade the queens off the board, then the position should just be completely winning for me. So he decided to pull the queen back, and I have a little idea that I'm going to go with here. I'm not 100% sure if it works, but taking on b5 opens up my bishop, which puts my bishop on the same diagonal as his king. With that being said, his f7 pawn is pinned, and pinned pieces does not protect, which means I am able to take on g6, and this is going to at least win me a pawn. But then if I take on g6, he plays pawn c4. Keep in mind that the pawn wouldn't be able to take, but if I take on g6, he plays pawn c4. And then I'm gonna force to move my queen. He takes the pawn. So let's just take the pawn on c5. I need to finish my development though, I'm not gonna lie. And then he plays knight h4, which is not a bad move. He's applying a lot of pressure to g2. But seeing that I'm ahead in material, to defend against this, I just need to trade pieces off the board. Get the bishops off the board. My bishop also guard g2. I'm ahead by 6 points. Only thing that's wrong with my position is what's happening on the queen side here. I need to get these pieces out. So the queen went over to a8, which is also not bad. He's basically saying if I takes, he takes, and he's still threatening mate. But we know that to take is a mistake. So I'm going to play the move knight c3. And that's just me adding further support to my bishop on d5. The rook c8 is not a bad move. This is actually a very nice idea, because if I go queen d5, there is rook takes e3, and then I may lose my bishop. But luckily, I have a nice in-between move. First, I could take his bishop on b7, seeing that way I'm attacking his queen. So if he takes my queen, I take his queen. And then once his queen takes back, my rook is under attack. He's also threatening a checkmate. But now I'm going to pull my queen all the way back to f2, defending against the checkmate, and I'm attacking his knight, which means once he saves his knight, I should be able to finally complete my development, get my a rook in the game, and then all my pieces are going to be active. He pulls the knight back to f5. Let's play bishop to e3, just developing my bishop. And remember that bishops are better than knights, but if you're ahead by 6 points, then none of that matters. Like, you're just trying to trade all the pieces off the board. So he plays knight f8. He's trying to get his knight back in the game. Now I'm going to get my last piece in the game, rook to c1, also putting my rook on the same line as his rook, which means that's another trade that I could try to do. So knight e6 was played. This rook on f1 isn't really doing much, so let's go rook to d1. Now both of my rooks are on open files. Rook to c4 was played. It doesn't really do much or attack much. He's attacking f4 twice. I'm also guarding f4 twice, which means I should be able to just play pawn to b3 and attack the rook. Now he has to just move the rook out the way, unless he plays this move, which is a nice idea that I didn't see. Because now if I take the knight, he takes my pawn. But I'm just going to take the rook. And then if he takes my rook, I take back the knight. And I'm still ahead by 6 points here. I'm ahead by an entire rook, by the way. So again, I'm welcoming all the trades. So a move like queen to f3, I'm going to play, even though if he takes my queen, I double up my pawns. Now, he should not trade. He cannot trade. He has to play something like queen a7 or queen b6, to check my king. But then I'm just going to move the king out the way. So he checks. Let's move the king out the way. There's nothing else coming. And then once he plays knight d4, he's also about to lose even more material. Well, I wouldn't say lose more material, but I'm going to play queen to e3, which means his knight is now pinned to the queen. So if he moves away the knight, I'm just going to take the queen. The only squares where he could put the knight and he doesn't lose material is c6 or b5. But then once he puts the knight there and I take the queen and his knight has to take and I take on d7, I'm just ahead by an entire rook, which means I'm completely winning this game. Now, from here, all I need to do is just push my pass pawn all the way up the board and get a queen. So let's just play a4, a5, push the pawn up the board and get a queen. Right, so he moves the knight. Let's just play f5 in this position. The plan is to play e6, and I'm just going to be creating another pass pawn, and he should be getting checkmated. Surprised he's not resigning. So he moves the knight. Let's play e6. And once he takes, I'm just going to take. Now I have two pass pawns rolling up the board. He moves the king. And now I'm just going to, let's just attack the knight first. I want to attack the knight because the knight covers a5 and c7. But once he moves away the knight, then I should be able to push one of my pass pawns. He puts the knight on a5. Now let's push the pass pawn with check. And then once he plays king to e8, I hit him with knight to e4. And now I'm just planning on playing knight to d6 checkmate. So I'm assuming he has to move his king to f7. I'm still going to hit him with knight d6 and trade my queen. He didn't do any of that, which means that's just a checkmate. But more RUY Lopez against 1,800 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,800. More RUY Lopez, more Spanish game. Let's go bishop to b5 here. And after this a6 move, you don't necessarily have to give up your bishop for the knight. Just pull the bishop back and maintain the pressure on the knight. And then once the knight attacks the pawn on e4, we're going to ensure that we play the RUY Lopez aggressively. So you don't necessarily have to defend the pawn if you quickly get your king out the center of the board. Because if the knight tries to take a free pawn, now we can think about ways to open the center of the board, seeing that his king will be in the center. So he decided to play b5, and you shouldn't be afraid of pulling a bishop back to b3 because it attacks this f7 pawn. And usually once we target the f7 pawn, a lot of crazy stuff could happen. And he decided still not to take the pawn and put the bishop on c5. So there's a lot of different ways to navigate this, but especially when there's a bishop on c5, we definitely want to hit them with c3. Pawn c3 followed by pawn d4. It's a RUY Lopez idea. Like being a RUY Lopez player, you're going to be playing pawn c3 followed by pawn d4 to get a big center. And keep in mind, when the king is in the center of the board, you're never really afraid of knight takes e4 due to some rook to e1 ideas. If knight e4, no, we're not going to go rook e1 due to the f2 pawn. But if knight e4, I could consider playing d4 first, or I could either consider playing queen e2. He decided to play d6, which is guarding the pawn. We're not going to be playing knight g5 now. He's just going to simply castle. So let's continue with the idea of playing pawn d4, hitting the bishop, forcing the bishop to move. And usually the pin on our knight is not extremely dangerous, especially when we're able to play the knight d2 idea to guard it. And I'm assuming you guys know about the knight d2, rook e1, knight f1, knight g3 idea to start some attack on the opponent's king. So he did decide to take the pawn. Let's just take back. The bishop is now under attack, and we have this very big center, which is what we wanted. And then the bishop goes back to a7. But since it's going to be a positional game, I'm going to start by playing pawn to h3 just to prevent the bishop from going there. And still not worried about knight takes e4 due to rook e1. But after this, I'm assuming he's just going to get his king out the center of the board. I'm going to go rook e1. So he plays h6. He's also trying to prevent my bishop from pinning his knight. So let's go rook to e1. It's either rook e1 or knight d2 or either knight c3. I think these are all good moves, but let's go rook e1. We're usually always going to be putting our rook on e1 and then he castle his king. Now, if I could get my knight to g3, that would be good. The thing about my position is the moment I play knight d2, my d4 pawn will be under attack. And then if I play bishop e3, then my e4 pawn is going to be under attack. I'm thinking of just, sure, let's just go knight c3. Let's develop the knight this way, seeing that way there's no bishop g4. I could still try to go knight e2 to g3, but I just need to be careful about my e4 pawn. So because my rook is one of the defender, the knight is one of the defender. So if I play knight back to e2, I don't want to be allowing knight takes e4 unless I have some nice tactic, against his unprotected knights with moves like bishop to d5, then it would work. So rook to e8 was played, and that's a very nice idea because the same knight e2 idea will not work because of knight takes d4, I'm assuming. And if I go bishop to d5, I'm only attacking this, which means once he guards it, this is not under attack. With that being said, well, I have to be careful. I'm thinking about developing the bishop, but pawn to b4 could be something because my knight is like my only defender. Maybe I have bishop a4 if pawn d4. Like the idea of knight d5, there's knight takes e4, queen c2 does hit both of the knights. And if the bishop move, I take this knight. That's interesting, actually. And if he takes, I takes, and yeah, that's actually very interesting. Let's develop the bishop. But I'm definitely consider this pawn b4 move though, because it's a removing the guard type of tactic. So if he plays b4, I still have to be careful because once I play knight d5, my e4 pawn is going to be under attack 2 times, and I'm going to only be guarding it once. So the bishop went to b7. I mean, the thing about this position is both of his bishops are pointing this way, but what I'm also seeing is his bishops aren't really guarding his king. Like I'm thinking of queen d2 and sacrificing on h6, which is super thematic in these types of structures. Queen d2, I'm still slightly worried about pawn to b4, which hits the knight, and I don't. I'm definitely not gonna sack there. So queen d2, pawn b4, knight d5, and then he takes and he's attacking my queen. So I'm not going to be able to sack there as well. So pawn to b4 may be a threat in this position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a3 as a prophylactic move. Prophylaxis basically means seeing the opponent's idea and preventing it before it happens, which means if a pawn goes to b4, I'm going to take. Yes, he's going to be able to take with the knight, which also seems like a nice move because it applies more pressure to my e4 pawn. And maybe I should play queen d3 to guard the pawn, but I really want my queen on d2 so that way I'm able to sacrifice on h6. I'm thinking of rook to c1 as well, just ensuring that all my pieces join the game. So he decided to play queen to d7 and connect his rooks. I'm going to play queen to d2 and connect my rooks. But there's a little hidden idea with bishop takes h6. Usually when persons see that you're trying to sack, they pull the knight back to h7 and it kind of prevents the sack, but I'm still thinking of sacking because usually when the knight is on h7 and you sack, they try to put their queen on h6 to trade off the queens. And the queen is on d7, so that's not possible. So that's definitely something. And I don't really have a piece that is bad. I mean, he doesn't really have a piece that is bad. All his pieces are doing something, but they're doing something in this direction. I think his position is very aggressive, but from a defensive standpoint, I'm not seeing it. He pulls his knight back to e7, and I think he's trying to put his knight on g6 in case I sack. But I really do not think that works because of this bishop on the same diagonal as his king. So if I sack my bishop and he takes and then I play queen takes, maybe he thinks knight g6 is going to help him. But because my bishop is on the same line as his king, queen takes g6 is actually going to win the night. So personally, I'm just going to sacrifice on h6. This is under attack twice, but it's guarded twice. This is fine. I have a big center. If he takes, he's in trouble. I'm actually not expecting him to take, but he did take. So let's take on h6. His knight on f6 is under attack. I'm expecting knight h7 here. But as I said, this is usually where we just attack. Like, I'm not seeing a checkmate. I'm not going to act like I see the next 6 move that is going to happen. All I'm seeing is the fact that the guy's king is weak. His bishops are doing very good roles, but not in a defensive way. And I have this bishop on the same line as his king. The queen is attacking. The knight is able to jump in. I can play e5 to open more lines, swing this rook in the game. This knight could come in. I should at least have something. Oh, so knight h7, I sack and then take the knight. So there's no knight h7. He's in trouble. Knight g6 we spoke about, but that's a free knight, bro. The bishop is on the same line as the king. That's a free knight, bro. Now your king is in check, and I'm attacking the unprotected knight at the same time. So now he has to move the king, and then once he moves the king, we take the knight. And just like that, I just sacrificed a piece, but now I'm ahead by 5 points. Pawn to c5 was played. Now it's time to deliver or checkmate. I'm assuming he wants to play c4, block out my bishop. If I check, there's king e7. I'm not really seeing what I get. Like, I like the idea of knight d5 though. If knight d5, then I'm threatening mate because there's no king e7. And if knight d5, if he decides to get rid of my knight, I take and then I'm attacking his rook. So let's go with this idea. Let's hit him with knight d5. Pawn c4 loses the game immediately, so he has to take. Okay, he decided to play rook e6. As we said, the knight covers the e7 square, so that's just a checkmate. More RUY LOPEZ against 1900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1900 and more Spanish game coming your way. You notice how he immediately plays a6. We don't necessarily need to take the knight. Let's just pull the bishop back, maintaining the pressure on the knight. And eventually, our bishop could go back to f7 to b3 to target f7. So knight f6 was played to attack e4. And as we spoke about, we're just going to castle our king. And we are not afraid of losing the e4 pawn because we're just going to be applying a lot of pressure to this e file. Bishop e7 was played. If you notice, higher rated players, they want to ensure that they get their king out the center as quickly as possible. So his idea here is just to castle his king as quickly as he can. So because I have no way to try to keep his king in the center, if I take c takes, knight takes, there's either queen d4 or knight takes. And I'm just not seeing how I could keep his king in the center. I mean, I could try pawn to d4. And if he takes, I play pawn to e5. Yeah, let's try that. Let's play pawn to d4. I'm trying to be aggressive to keep his king in the center, but I mean, he's one move away from castling. If he takes with the knight, that's a nice move. I may play pawn to d5 to hit this knight. He could try pawn to d6, by the way. Pawn to d6 is actually a very playable move because if I try to play d5 to apply pressure to the pinned knight, he's able to play b5 and attack my bishop. And then if I take his knight, he takes my bishop. Okay, so he did decide to take the pawn. Let's continue with our plan, which was to play e5 and attack this knight. Now I could say I'm attacking his knight, and since I'm attacking his knight, he's not able to get castled. That's not my plan. The thing is, I'm down by a pawn, so if I want to regain my pawn, I'm going to have to spend a move to take the pawn, and he may use that move to get his king castled. But let's see. Knight to e4 was played. That's a decent move. And I can also see that the knight could be heading to c5, which would be attacking my bishop. So, for example, if I play rook e1 to hit the knight, there's knight c5. With that being said, let me just take back my pawn. You know, he could castle if he wants. What I'm not really afraid of is knight takes e5 taking this pawn because then he's going to have two unprotected pieces. So he decided to just quickly get his king out the center of the board. And again, knight c5 is coming. Knight takes e5 is also a possibility. I want to play f4 to guard my pawn, but I don't want to expose this diagonal pointing towards my king. If I takes, he could play d takes. Queen e2, there's still knight c5. Okay, this is actually tricky. How do I continue with my development in this position? All right, let's just play rook to e1 and hit the knight. He may play knight c5, and then up on knight c5, that's when I'm probably going to just get rid of his knight on c6. And that is giving up my bishop for a knight, though, so I don't think I have an advantage in this position. I'm trying to get a lead in development, but let's see what he does. So he did play knight c5, and I don't want to take on c6, because, okay, keep in mind that I'm going to lose my bishop. If I take on c6, he plays d takes c6, and I'm helping his bishop. So might as well I just pull the bishop back to b3. I'm going to lose it anyways. Now, if he takes, I can decide whether I want to take with the knight or just take with the a pawn to open up the a file for my rook. So he decided to trade knights first. Okay, that's a good move. Let's take. And now if he takes, I'm going to take with the pawn. And then it's just a equal position. No one has an advantage. You could say black has the bishop here, but I have very active control over the center of the board. If you notice, my queen is very active. My rook is very active. This could be an annoying pawn. He took. Let's just take back now. This rook is also active. But then he plays b6. As you can see, he's trying to ensure that he finishes development as quickly as possible. He wants to play bishop to b7. My development is not complete, so that's something that I need to just focus on. So with that being said, I'm gonna start by playing the move knight c3. And after bishop b7, I'm thinking of playing queen to g4 actually. I like the idea of queen to g4 because queen to g4 threatens bishop to h6. Now, I also want to play rook to d1, but there's always going to be pawn to d6. I like the idea of knight e4 as well. But let's start by playing queen to g4. This looks like the more aggressive way to play. It also keeps pressure on his d7 pawn, but I don't think his d7 pawn is going to be a weakness. I'm expecting him to play either rook e8 or king h8 in this position. Usually rook e8 is good because if I play bishop h6, there's bishop f8 and he's just safe. So he did play rook to e8. And now if I go bishop h6, there will be bishop to f8. I want to play knight to e4. Upon knight e4, I'm sure he's just gonna exchange his bishop for a knight, and I'm trying to keep as many pieces on the board here. There's knight e2 to g3, which is very interesting. I'm actually, yeah, let's go for that. Let's play knight e2. What I'm doing now is I'm trying to maneuver my pieces towards his king side. I'm just trying to have as many pieces towards his king. That's what I'm planning on doing to start my attack. Bishop h6, he's just going to play bishop f8. So I have to ensure that I time it. So for example, if I had a knight on g3 and my bishop was on h6 and he plays bishop f8, then I take on g7 and play knight f5 and I'm winning. But because I do not have enough pieces in the attack, it doesn't make sense going for the attack. And there's also a rule that says, people also call it the rule of three, but it basically says for a successful attack to work, you need at least three pieces. You need one to sacrifice and two to mate. Now I would only have my queen and my bishop, which means there's not a checkmate coming. On c5, I'd love to hear why he played pawn c5. Like if you're watching this, bro, tell me what was going through your mind. Oh, oh, he's probably trying to prevent knight d4. But if I'm trying to put a knight on d4, bro, to go to f5, you don't think I could put a knight on g3, which also goes to f5? Now I get access to h5. Now you have to be very careful, by the way, because bishop h6 now could be winning if he's not careful. Now we have three pieces in the attack. And my pawn on e5 is also doing a very nice job. So now I could say I like my position. And then he plays queen c7. He just does not care. He just doesn't care. He's like, okay, he's maneuvering a lot of pieces towards my king. I don't care. I have my bishop to guard it. But do you think your bishop by itself is gonna defend you in this position? I don't think so. First of all, knight h5 is just nice. Nah, never mind. Knight h5, there's g6. Bishop h6. If bishop h6, there is also g6. I think he needs to play g6 and not bishop to f8, actually. So let's do some calculation here. Bishop h6, pawn g6. I mean, I weaken his position, so let's just do it. Let's hit him with bishop h6. Now I have two pieces threatening g7. This is also a very cool way that I want you guys to attack. I say this so much times, but you guys know I don't care being repetitive because I want to drill it in your head. When it comes to attacking someone's king, you need to attack the squares and the pawns around the king, especially the ones that are only being guarded by the king. So he decided to play pawn to g6. Very strong move, by the way. The queen is on the same line as the king, though, so I'm thinking of just hitting him with knight to f5 and just attacking the bishop. Like, if I'm able to get rid of that dark squared bishop and I have a dark squared bishop on the board, then it's GG's. There's two ways to try doing that. There's knight h5 to f6, and there's just immediate knight to f5. Immediate knight to f5, bishop f8 should not be good because I'm going to take and he's losing. Immediate knight f5, bishop to d8, and putting his bishop too far away from the defense. So let's go with knight to f5. We have three pieces in the attack, guys, and the rook guards the pawn. And this rook, even though this rook is on an open file, this rook is actually not doing anything, to be honest. So the a rook needs to go on the d file to at least target the pawn, because I don't want to keep my rook on this open file if his bishop is just going to stay on b7. And this is what I mean when it comes to attacking someone's king. To attack someone's king, you need to check to see if there's any weaknesses around their king. You know, if there's any pawn or squares that can't be guarded by any pawns, or if there's not a lot of minor pieces around their king. So that's the first way to do it. The other way to do it is you have to create your own weaknesses. To create weaknesses around the opponent's king, you have to threaten some, create some threats, you know? And as I said a lot, it's not no fingers crossed type of business. It's not no, let me threaten a checkmate and then look on the other side of the board so that way he doesn't see what I'm doing. You know, it's to get him to push the pawns on the side that his king is on. Queen to c6. What are you doing? Okay, so there's a battery pointing towards g2, so I need to be careful. I also need to keep in mind that this is now opposite colored bishops scenario. And because it's opposite colored bishop scenario, the bishop that is more aggressive will be the better bishop. Now let's get rid of this dark squared bishop. It's opposite colored bishop. So who has the more aggressive bishop is ahead by a piece. That's basically how it's done. So he took with the rook, bishop to g5 immediately hits the rook. And once he moves the rook, we hit him with bishop to f6. And then he's going to get scared. He's going to be scared once I hit him with bishop f6, because the plan from there is to go for a low-list mate. So bishop g5, I'm just trying to be careful. I'm not trying to blunder anything. But let's hit him with bishop g5 first. I'm sure that the rook has to move. And now that he moves the rook, we're going to hit him with bishop to f6. Hit him with bishop f6. I mean, if he wants to sacrifice the rook, that's on him. But my queen is heading towards h6. Now he's scared. I'm sure he's scared. I mean, pawn to h5. And then once I play queen to g5, he plays king to h7. That's not a bad way to deal with it. Not gonna lie. That's not a bad way to deal with it. But again, it's opposite colored bishop. Who do you think has the stronger bishop? Keep in mind, my bishop is right where his king is. If the moment I get the 2 inch of scared from this bishop, I'm just gonna play pawn to f3, and then his queen and his bishop is just not gonna be doing anything. He decided to play h6 instead, which also makes a lot of sense because he's just planning on playing king to h7 at this point. So let's play the move rook to e3. I like rook to e3. Rook to e3. This is called a rook lift, by the way. The whole idea is to just swing my rook into the attack and attack that h6 pawn. You notice how we're getting him to push the pawns on the side that his king is on. Keep doing it. Keep pushing the pawns on the side that your king is on. And then he plays d6. Now that he plays d6, I'm going to hit him with rook to h3. King to h7 loses the game due to the rook sacrifice. Hit him with rook to h3. I'm assuming he's going to play the move pawn to h5, but then rook takes h5 also loses the game. So after rook h3, I think he may have to sacrifice his rook. And then once he sacked the rook, I'm just going to be chilling. So let's hit him with rook to h3. And he's now in real trouble. There's just so many pieces where his king is. This is actually a very nice attacking game, by the way. I really hope that you guys learn something from this and how to attack. I don't want you to be sitting there memorizing, okay, let me memorize the RUY Lopez. Once he plays that move, I need to play that move. And then if he plays that move, that's not how you do it. So he took. Oh shoot, I forgot that he could have also just take. Oh boy, oh boy, I completely forgot about that move. Now if I takes, there's rook takes and there's no mate. Oh boy, my bishop is also under attack. Completely blundered. That was just bad. That was a blunder. Oh my god. I completely rushed the I was so confident. Okay, I'm losing now. Let's just move the bishop out the way. How I missed that, I don't know. Oh. The good thing is he's gonna lose on time or something, but I'm just down by a pawn. Like I could still try to get some attack on his king, but I thought d6 was just not as strong. And now he plays queen to e4. So he's just trying to get the pieces off the board. Yeah, I completely messed up. But let's just trade though. The thing is, the actual position is now just drawn, seeing that we're in opposite colored bishops. Luckily, I'm gonna win because he just does not have any time on the clock, and he's gonna either blunder or I win on time. But that's not as clean. I just didn't have any respect for his defense. All right, so he plays pawn to e4. My bishop isn't really doing much right now. Let's play rook to d1 though. Let's get my rook on the file. And then he plays rook to d8. Let's play h3. I'm trying to trap his bishop, and then he plays h5. He's also playing very strong very quickly. So I may also not win. I'm probably going to win on time, to be honest. Let's see. How do we even do this now? All right, I'm going to go bishop to g5 to cover the e3 square. Oh, but then the guy play. Why is this guy playing so well? Okay, I have to go back, and then there's g5, and now I have to go back. He's playing very well. Now he wants to play f5. Okay, let's play h4. So if he plays f5, I take, and then if he takes, my bishop goes back to f4. Okay, now the position is just drawn, but I'm not gonna try to draw. I'm gonna try to win. All right, now I'm gonna double up on the file. Okay, now we double up on the d file. And I'm going for some ideas. Rook to d7. Let's hit the rook. Let's attack the rook. And then once he moves the rook, let's try rook to d7 now. So now my plan is to try to get 2 rooks on his 7th rank. But he just doesn't have enough time on the clock, so he's going to lose. Rook c6. Let's go rook a7. Hit the unprotected pawn. But I'm also just trying to get 2 rooks on the 7th. Once you're able to get 2 rooks on the 7th rank, it's usually a very strong advantage. He took the pawn. Let's give a check here. Okay, how am I going to be able to deliver a checkmate now? I'm trying to get my... Okay, let's start. Let's start with rook h7, threatening the mate. And then once he moves the king, I'll go bishop h6. And now I'm threatening checkmate in two moves. He also has no time on the clock, which means he lost on time. More Roy Lopez against 2,000 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 2,000, and we're going to be finishing up the Roy Lopez. So let's hit the pawn. Black guards the pawn. And this is the Roy Lopez. So a6 was played. We need to pull the bishop back to a4. That's what we've spoke about the entire time. And I may play this the positional way. I may play it the aggressive way. It all depends on how the opponent plays it. Knight f6 hits the pawn. We're just going to castle the king. We know that we're not afraid of the knight taking here. There's always going to be rook to e1. And we should be able to win back the pawn. So pawn to d6 was played. So he's basically guarding his pawn before he tries to take mine. And usually I would play pawn to d4 here to just try to open the center of the board. But because this opponent is 2,000, I'm going to try to play the more positional way so that way you guys could see like, like at least one high level game. So I'm going to start by playing the move rook to e1, just ensuring that I guard my pawn. And then after bishop to e7, I'm going to play the move pawn to c3. And pawn to c3, the whole idea is to eventually play pawn to d4. But usually, we don't want to play pawn to d4 if bishop to g4 is a possibility, which is why I'm also going to play the move pawn to h3 to prevent the bishop from going to g4. Now I can try to play pawn to d4 and have a big center, especially since now that my opponent plays b5, I'm actually going to pull my bishop back to c2 and not b3 because as black, they usually want to play knight a5 to hit the bishop. So my plan from here is to play d4, try to get my knight to f1, then g3, and eventually develop my dark squared bishop. So the bishop went to b7. I'm thinking of d4, but then there should be takes, knight b4, which is a bit annoying, and I don't want to allow that. I may just decide to play d3 first. Then once I get my knight to g3, I play d4. You guys have to keep in mind that when it comes to the Roy Lopez, especially when you're trying to play like the more high-rated version, you have to ensure that you be very patient and play it very positionally. Because if d4 takes knight b4, it's going to be hard for me to save my bishop. So let's just play pawn to d3 here. I'm going to try to get my knight to g3 first, then I play d4. So black immediately plays pawn to d5. And if I takes, queen takes, guard the pawn. So that's not really winning a pawn. But I'm just going to continue with my plan with knight to d2. If he takes on e4, I should be able to take on e4 and then just continue with the same idea. And because his bishop is not on this f5 square, once I manage to get my knight to g3, I'm going to be targeting the f5 square and eventually targeting g7. So h6 was played. Not sure why, but if I play knight f1, he takes, he trades the queens off the board, and I'm not going to be able to attack. So I'm going to start by playing the move queen to e2, and then I'm going to try to pull my knight back to f1. Now, to play chess like this, you have to ensure that you're very good at positional chess, and you have to ensure that you're not blundering while you're doing it. You have to ensure that you're able to see all the small, slight changes in the position as you go along. He got his rook in the game, which is on the same line as my queen, so I have to be careful. Nothing didn't really change too much in the position, so I'm just going to be continuing with my plan of knight g3. One idea that black usually tries in these types of situation is bishop to f8, pawn g6, bishop to g7, and it also prevents my knight from going to the f5 square. So if that's what he's playing for, then he knows something about chess. He's also using up a lot of time though, which means even though he's finding a lot of good moves, he has to think in order to find them. So I mean that could count for something. But he decided to put the bishop on c5 instead, which is also decent because that's an active diagonal for the bishop. And I'm assuming once I play this knight g3 move, he's gonna play knight to e7, trying to prevent my knight from going there. There's also the idea of knight h4 to f5 as well. So this is usually what the GM's game look like when they're playing the Roy Lopez. And I remember when I was younger, And there was this bishop on c2, and I was like, why would someone put their bishop on c2? It's just pointing towards these two pawns. It's not doing anything. And technically it's not, but because the pawns are mobile and I can always take and then push, the bishop is actually okay on c2. It's just a bit inactive for the moment. So the pawn take on e4, and I have to just take back with the pawn. And now my bishop, you could say my bishop is now bad because the pawn on e4 is not mobile. But the good thing is I can always put my bishop back on b3. But once I'm going to be putting my bishop on b3, I have to ensure that I'm on the lookout for this knight a5 move. So he finally saw the idea of pulling the bishop back, but it basically means he wasted some time because he played bishop c5, then back to f8. If I play, I mean, I'm actually considering knight to f5 now. Because when I go knight f5, there will not be any g6 due to his h6 pawn being a blunder. But if knight f5, knight e7, that's when I may play knight to h4. So that way I can maintain a very strong knight on f5. And eventually he may play bishop to c8 trying to take, but I'll just let him do it. So that way I have the bishop here. So let's go for it. Let's go knight f5. My knight is on a strong square. I was actually thinking of bishop e3 if he didn't move the bishop. I'm also trying to put my rook on d1, but I'm trying to put the a rook on d1. He plays knight a5. I guess he's trying to put his knight on c4, which is not bad. He may also want to just push the pawns up the board. Now I need to think about how I'm going to be developing. Like, if I play bishop to e3, then I'm losing my e4 pawn. With that being said, I'm going to play the move pawn to a4, which is also one of the thematic moves in the RUY LOPEZ. It's also a pawn break. Like, he's not able to take because my rook gets the file. He may be able to push. Otherwise, I could take and then my rook gets the file. Let's see how he responds to this. Definitely not going to play c6 though, because it blocks out his bishop. So he did play pawn to b4. I mean, I could take, but then the bishop takes. That doesn't really help. I'm thinking of just playing bishop to d2 here. If bishop to d2, there's no knight c4. If he takes, then my bishop takes, and I have a very strong bishop. He could try to play pawn to b3. Didn't see pawn to b3, but then I should be able to play bishop to d3, slowly get my rook in the game, maybe even pull the bishop back to c1 and play some chess from there. So let's go with that idea. Let's go bishop d2, rook d1. That's the plan. Pawn to b3, though, I'm not going to act like it's not a good move. He plays pawn to c5, so maybe he wants to play pawn b3 and pawn c4. But now that he plays c5, I should be able to simply take with the pawn. Like, what if I play rook to d1 now? Maybe even rook d1 first is good. Yeah, let's go rook to d1 first, because I'm putting my rook on the same line as his queen. I'm getting all my pieces in the game. All my pieces are now doing something. The only piece of mine that I don't really like is actually the c2 bishop, but it's doing a good defensive role. And his bishop on b7 is very strong. His knight on f6 is also very strong. So the queen moved to c7. And I'm going to start some attacking ideas on his king. You notice how he moves his queen off the same line as my rook? Now I'm thinking of moves like knight to h4 or even knight to h2 and then queen to f3. So that way I'm threatening knight takes h6. And then eventually I could try to get this knight back in the game this way. Yeah, let's go for that. Let's go knight h2. My knight could also go to the g4 square as well. There's a lot of stuff happening. Like, I also like knight g4. So my plan from here is either queen to f3 followed by knight takes h6, or knight to g4, or knight f1 followed by knight e3, which is why the grandmasters play these types of positions, because it's just a lot of different plans that you could use. So if you're a higher rated player playing a weaker player, a lower rated player, or if you just think you're good at positional chess and you're able to outplay your opponent, which basically means your average move is better than the opponent, and you're going to be getting some good games. Queen c6 is nice. Now there's three pieces attacking e4. I also have three pieces defending e4 though, so for now I should be safe. And now I'm thinking of just immediate queen f3. Immediate queen f3 goes with this. Knight g4 may not work anymore. I'm leaning more towards the queen f3 idea. Queen f3 though, he may just moves the knight, but I'm gonna go with queen f3. It's an attacking. Oh, it actually doesn't even create a threat because his queen is guarding the knight. So my queen f3 was wasting time, and now I'm also allowing his knight to get to the c4 square. The good thing is, if the knight goes to c4, I go bishop c1, and my bishop on c1 is actually active. Like, you may think it's undeveloped and everything, but I'm trying to make some sacrificial ideas work on this h6 pawn. So rook to d1 was played. My opponent is playing very well, though. I'm not gonna lie. He's just ensuring that all his pieces are active. Okay, now I'm gonna play pawn to g4. I like pawn to g4. It's an aggressive attacking move. And again, generally you don't want to be pushing pawns on the side that your king is on, but I'm not really seeing how he's going to punish me for this. Pawn to b3 is a nice move because it looks like he's winning a pawn. But I don't think I should care too much about losing a pawn when I could attack his king. So let's just pull the bishop back. And I'm not expecting his queen to take. So he pulls the knight back to h7 first. No, his queen could try to take. Maybe he's trying to play knight to g5. To prevent knight to g5, I'm going to play pawn to h4. And I'm also continuing with my own attack. And then his knight get to c4, attacking my bishop. So I'll pull the bishop back, guarding my pawn. And it's a very imbalanced position. I'm not going to lie. Basically, if I do not checkmate him, then I'm just going to be down by a pawn because he just took my pawn. But I'm going to try to play for a checkmate here. Let's just move the pawn to g5, just moving the pawn up the board. My knight on h2 could also join the game. Let's take. And then he pulls the queen back. So he's applying more pressure here, and the queen is defending his sixth rank, which means if I push, he's just going to take with the queen, and I do not really have much. But the move I like, though, is knight to g4. I'm just trying to, you see how many pieces I have that is close to his king? Like, honestly, I'm not really seeing any attack or, well, not attack, but I'm not really seeing like the tactic that I have to win the game. But it's just so hard for him to play. So queen to g6, now I'm able to play knight to h4 and hit the queen. And I thought he couldn't have played queen to h5, but he can actually play queen to h5. Because if he plays queen to h5, I thought I could have played knight to f6, but there is knight takes f6, which means my knight on h4 is just under attack. But let's play queen to g3 to guard it. If he tries to take, then I could say he's opening the file for my queen pointing towards his king, but I'm honestly not really seeing what I get from that. Okay. He's also threatening to sack his queen. Like if he sack his queen and then I take his queen, knight f3 is gonna just be a nice tactic. So I need to not allow that. So maybe I need to put this knight back on f5. Yeah, maybe that's what I need to do. Or just take this and get rid of the queen and then yeah, let's do that. Let's take this, get rid of the queen, and once the queen takes, I play knight f3, hit the queen. So I'm still attacking. I'm attacking down a pawn. He has less than a minute on the clock. Queen f4, very nice move. He's trying to trade. And okay, now I'm not really seeing my attack working anymore. And I do not want to lose any more pawns. So let's just play the end game. Okay, this is a very weird scenario that I'm in. Okay, let's take here. After rook takes, I'm gonna try knight e5. It's probably losing. Because there's knight takes b2. Okay, he didn't do it. He decided to trade and then play rook to d2. But I'm able to play knight to c4, hit the rook. From here, it's just bullet though. So let me just play fast and try not to lose on time. So knight a4, hit the bishop, hit the pawn. Bishop moves, I grab the pawn. g5, let's just move the knight. Maybe push my pawn up the board. Okay, this guy's very fast. So I have to ensure that I play fast as well. Let's go f3. Okay, that's a pawn. Let's take. Let's go here, threatening this. Let's get the king in the game. He's very fast. Okay, let me just get my bishop up. Okay, let's hit this pawn. Let's hit the bishop. He's too fast. Check. Didn't see that. Have to move. Bishop is still under attack. Maybe just pull my bishop back here. Attack his rook on the next move. Okay, that's a pawn. That's a pawn. Okay, let me guard this. I'm only ahead by 9 seconds. And he's fast. He's very fast. Okay, let's take. Okay, let's move. Fudge. Oh, did I blunder that man? Now I'm mated. Ah, that was weird. Oh.